Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the special council meeting of July 31st, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and by doing so, also give the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continues to this day. Welcome everyone, and before we get started with approval of the agenda, I will just let everybody know that Mayor Murdoch and Councillor Watson are coming to us via Zoom, so they are here, they're just coming in electronically. I would look now for an approval of the agenda, please. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. I would just like to remind anybody who would like to speak, and oh no, we don't have a public participation, so I'm not going to remind anybody. That's right, because it's a special council meeting. The mayor's remarks, there's not really anything to say. I'm not sure if the mayor wants to jump in, but I will just say that we had a very successful Music in the Park last week. We had about 700 people out in Willows Park, and the next Music in the Park will come on August 10th. And I would also like to just thank our neighboring municipalities for their help in handling of the suspicious death that we had in our community last week, and our thoughts go out to the family. So moving on, Mayor, I assume you have nothing else to add, so I'm going to move on to the special meeting matters. Number 4.1, these are subject to public input, and the first on the agenda will be the Housing Accelerator Fund Program. We did have a little bit of a touch on this at our last meeting. Mr. Bull, you went through that very, very quickly, so I'd like to give you the opportunity once again to go through it. I know that you will try and keep it short again, but at least you have a little bit more time this time. So Director Bull, please take it away.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is about a federal grant application program announced earlier this year with a fair amount of publicity, promotional events for staff, but also for elected officials, and most notably at the AVIC conference in April, I believe. And given the significant interest in this program, we have looked into the requirements and proposed or put together a proposed grant application. The presentation outline summarizes the different sections of the report and the implications for financial and engagement needs. Next. The program itself then fits under the National Housing Strategy, and the Government of Canada aims to incentivize the implementation of local actions that remove barriers to the housing supply and accelerate the growth of supply. And to do this, they have created a program that contains $4 billion, and the goal is to support the creation of 100,000 new homes, or accelerated homes, so to say, in terms of production and becoming available, and fast-tracking the creation of the new housing supply. These are minimum requirements related in the program. A couple of the components that are required to be submitted: a housing action plan that has at least 7 initiatives to increase the community's growth by at least 10%, to achieve an annual growth rate of at least 1.1%, to commit to certain reporting obligations, and to update the housing needs assessment for the community. And this is a pretty clear list. I should note that initially the federal government was still working out the details, and some of this information has become available over the last couple of months. In terms of the time frame, so yeah, the application will be scored and evaluated against the expected number of net new permitted housing units through a building permit being approved. The time frame is to be September 2023 through to September 2026. And I should note that's a very short timeline for new projects to achieve building permits. The grant itself would be paid in 4 equal payments, and the last installment would be subject to the target or progress towards the target that is part of the application. The use of the funding then, and I'll talk about the estimated grant in a moment, but it's geared towards supporting housing initiatives, either from the housing action plan that is submitted or other affordable housing initiatives. It may also be used for housing-related or community-related infrastructure, and that's pipes in the ground and roads and that kind of infrastructure. The evaluation criteria, so focus on that 3-year period, looking at the annual growth rate over that period, and also the change in growth with the period prior to this period. The program is geared clearly, if you look at where the highest grant amounts are available for, that's for multi-unit housing near rapid transit. But other housing types that are more relevant for the Oak Bay context include missing middle housing types and other multi-unit housing types. There's also a point system which has been attached to your report for information. Through our conversations with the CMHC staff, we understand that this program is expected to be very competitive and oversubscribed, and the 1.1% growth rate is a minimum threshold that would be required to be eligible, and a clear indication from the fact that higher projected growth rates would be earning higher scores, and that's also reflected in the attachment. And the other thing I should note is that major city centers throughout Canada, so the major cities of Canada, have had an opportunity to invite and to apply earlier than the rest of the other communities in Canada, and those will be prioritized in the review. I assume with the intent to support accelerated growth, particularly in urban centers. The next section is a bit of an exploration or an outline of the Oak Bay context. It is something we've been reflecting on as we look at the creation of this grant application, and there's some unique characteristics that set us apart from other communities that are still experiencing growth. And it means also that establishing a substantial annual growth for us in Oak Bay, that it requires a major shift in community planning, which is still in its early stages at this point. Next slide, please. So yeah, first off, I'd like to acknowledge that our community has been long established and built out since about 1960s, 70s. We were part of the early development of our region that has resulted in mostly single-family neighborhoods throughout the district. But also in the formation over time of village areas, most notably, of course, Oak Bay Avenue and to some extent Cadborough Bay. So that also means that because there's no land left for subdivision, we haven't really seen substantial growth since over the last 50 years. Compared to a lot of other BC communities, we haven't really had any growth. That also caused us to set up new programs. So, however, we've started to look at that, and I'll get to that in a moment. The district is preparing for new growth because I think over the last 10 to 20 years, like other communities, we've become aware of changing housing needs, and also with the way housing prices have gone, clearly there need to be different solutions in this time and age for housing. And these are some of the changes that the district has prepared. In 2014, the official community plan was renewed, a new OCP was put in place. It already designated all single-family areas for infill housing, but it is still hinging on rezoning applications. In 2020, we also produced a housing needs assessment. That assessment indicated or estimated a housing need of about 130 units per year, which comes down to 1.6% a year for a 5-year period, which is partially passed now. So in the short run and currently, we're not meeting that kind of average annual growth. However, some of these other programs in stream are going to work towards addressing that kind of need. The secondary suite changes from 2022 are completed, of course, so that's now in our zoning bylaw. It has seen some uptake as well, both for existing conversions as well as new ones. And I think most prominently, and talk about the near future, our infill housing program, and I'll talk about it in a moment a bit more. And the more long-term opportunity lies in the Cedar Hill Corners site that is owned by UVic. It's currently pretty much a vacant site, green space though, and but that's a long-term opportunity for additional housing options. So there's also a number of external factors that explain why we don't see a lot of redevelopment interest in Oak Bay at the moment. I just wanted to highlight some of these. There's a lack of vacant land, as I was referring to already. There's no significant land assembly, so we don't see either realtors or developers assembling a number of parcels and putting them collectively on the market. That's something you see in other communities. We don't have, like a lot of other communities, we don't have industrial lands that became derelict or are run down, or commercial properties that are redeveloping. And a lot of our residential properties are, because of our location and the character and the quality of this, the living environment here, they're very high priced and also well maintained. And I think for a lot of these reasons, there's not a lot of interest from individual owners for individual properties to look beyond renovations or rebuild. That's really the typical activity that we do see in our district, but not a lot of interest in other redevelopment of a more intensive kind. There's also external factors playing out at a national, international level even, which have also put brakes on housing construction, and that's construction labor scarcity, increase in construction cost. There was a news item recently where RBC reported an increase of residential construction costs of 51% since the first quarter of 2020. So those are very significant cost increases. And on top of that, there's also a drastic change in interest rates, which has made it harder for particularly larger projects to run through the process. Moving on then to the actual outline of the grant application itself. So I will be going over the required elements for this grant application. The first part is a housing action plan, as they call it. That includes 7 approved council priorities that also are funded in our current budget. I won't list them all, but they sound familiar to council, and they can also be found in the council's lineup for priority projects and are covered in the budget. On top of those in-stream projects, we are proposing to outline the following initiatives on top of that, which is part of what is considered the acceleration portion of the program, and that's where CMHC, the federal government, is looking for additional efforts. So we think those additional efforts for secondary suites, for example, we have a project coming up for incentives. We think that approved funding would support us establishing higher incentives and more effective incentives that would seek a higher uptake. And the second idea there is to explore and commit to exploring and including secondary suite readiness for new construction, for any new construction. For infill housing, similarly, grant funding from the federal government would support a grant program. We haven't really thought about that yet, but similar to secondary suites incentives, there could be a infill housing incentive program. And the second measure that we have included in the proposed outline is a pre-zoning for duplexes throughout single-family areas. There are several hundred of existing duplexes, but I think the rationale for staff to be somewhat comfortable with a change like this is that that's still talking about 2 households per lot, which is not that different from a single family and a secondary suite. So with that in mind, that was another measure that we felt could be considered. Let's see if I'm not missing anything. Next slide, please. The second part is for the rental housing strategy and the housing action plan. That's a combined project, 2 projects in one for next year. Again, funding would support incentives there for either affordable market rental or condo development. And the other benefit from approved funding would be that it could free up funding that we already had designated for certain projects, use grant funding for that instead, and then have another look at where we could use these funds elsewhere under our own funding mechanisms. And then finally, for optimization and digitization, also a council priority project that hasn't been scoped fully yet, but we think with grant funding we would be able to buy, I'm calling it additional or more advanced technology, so probably software. And the other topic would be to expedite streamlining, we do it faster and do a more focused and fast-tracked execution of that project. Then the second part of the application is a housing supply growth target. And this slide outlines what the grant proposal could include. And this is also explained in more detail in attachments number 2 and 3 to your reports. And we're And we're both looking at the 2023 to 2026 window for the grant application program, but we also took a long-term view for some of the initiatives that we think will pan out a bit longer in the future, into the future. So we're looking at 2033. So that kind of comes down to the three bullet there on the slide. The base growth right now sits at about 0.3%, we estimate, based on the changes to the secondary suites and also seeing some activity in single family. The next item would be 0.7 growth, and that would be our estimated growth, and it's all based on assumption and projections, but that would be related to the approved council priority projects and the existing plans that we do have. And then the third bullet, we think that with an approved Housing Acceleration Fund grant, we would add in another 0.8% growth annually. And that would be through those incentives that I was talking about, and also some of the bylaw changes that are potentially included. And that would bring us to a housing supply growth target for this grant application for those 3 years of 1.8% per year. In a graph that looks like this, several lines here. So the gray line down below, which stabilizes at about 30 units a year. That's our status quo without our council priority projects, basically single family and secondary suites. The yellow line is our own trajectory based on our info housing, but also our village area planning and other projects. And then the blue line reflects what we have estimated the approved funding from the feds could help us with a more focused and faster growth in the first 3 years. And after that, assuming that that programs will be wrapped up after that, a longer term growth of about 120 units a year. And our own long-term range is the top part of the yellow line. That's a 100 and, it's too small for me, 180. And that particular jump that you see there, that's assuming that there would be some bigger projects down the road, either on the UVic lands or somewhere else, possibly in the district. That is an assumed and projected jump there. So in terms of numbers, percentages only say so much. So currently, to give you some numbers, current number of housing units is 8,189, just over 8,000. So without any further changes, if we stopped making any changes today, we think in 10 years that would be about 300 new units related to suites mainly. With all our council priorities and with the HAVE program, I think by 2023 we're looking at 1,250 new units. And that comes down to about 50% growth. So, and our estimated annual growth based on our own program would already rise from 0.3 to 1 and potentially to over 2 if and when we have major projects. The next slide shows a graph on this, and it shows kind of, because it's 10 years now, everything gets stretched wider, of course. So the previous slide showed a big jump. Over here it's kind of a gentle hill, but the blue line shows the effects of the current program for the grant application, which has a bigger increase sooner, but then later on kind of has a slightly lower long-term growth. And the yellow line is again our district line for 2023, all the way to 2023. Moving to the next part and talking about what this means for us as an organization if we're successful. So if successful, of course, we are going to receive a grant and we would be expected to action our plan and achieve the housing supply growth target. But I should note that will require significant efforts. This is very small, but I didn't have enough time to summarize it in a different way. But basically our estimated grant is about 6 million based on the current proposal. And if you have very good eyes or a magnifier, you can see that the per unit amount varies between different types of units, with the highest funded units are the ones close to rapid transit, which is not really applicable in a case, but other units are eligible for an amount of up to $20,000 per unit in base funding and either 7,000 or 12,000 additional funding per unit for middle or other units. So substantial per unit contributions. So it would need, of course, resources to action this housing action plan, because it's an accelerated form of some of our existing plans, or of all our existing plans. So we do think that for that reason, it probably is likely that it would affect other non-housing related council priority projects. We don't really know exactly how it would all play out because because some of the programs that we are developing, the details of that are not yet known, right? For example, infant housing between the different housing types is going to be, it will depend if something is approved by building permit or development permit or rezoning. So there's a lot of unknowns there. Digital solutions might help with timing or the process itself. But I think if you look at the numbers, they kind of tell the story between up to 15 to 30 units that we anticipate based on what we have done so far, but lifting that to about 90 to 125 extra housing units per year, that's and every year, right? So that builds up a bigger pipeline, so to say, of projects, because most projects are in the pipeline for, say, about 2 years. It increases the need for staff to review those, and that's throughout different departments. So a very rough estimate based on a similar estimate we did for infill housing. We think for this particular program, for the grant, it would be somewhere between 2 and 4, but it's an FTE equivalent, so it's not 2 to 4 individuals. It's efforts throughout different teams, and depending on the team, it would be covered in a different way. So what can the funding be used for? 6 million is not a small sum. So it could be used for the projects itself. Community infrastructure is another option. Let me see. Yeah, in our report, we've highlighted one particular project that could fit well with this, and that's a North Oak Bay pump station consolidation and water main upgrade. And the other option is to look at moving funding around within our own budget with the help of this grant. Community engagement. I should know that right now we have developed this fairly quickly, and this has been done outside a formal project structure. And so particularly the housing supply growth target, we feel a little bit some unease, so to say, because it hasn't been vetted by you just yet, that's today, but also not by the public. Next slide. And so in the framework that we've been using for community engagement, we're really only at the information level here. And you're the ones that see it and will submit it. Now there will be further consultation, but a future consultation is to say, but it will be related to the project itself. And it would, in that sense, preempt some of the community engagement that we might see through infill housing or village area planning, but we might actually talk about the housing targets or the long-term growth potential of the district itself. So I want to make sure that with a grant application like this, there's expectations raised and also commitments made that need to be accommodated by focusing on the how rather than the if and the what. And that's a little bit of a contrast. That's why I included this slide. In the case of the infill housing, we have taken a very deliberate consultation approach, engaging with the community, building on our key principles there, and the guiding principles and key directions, as I say, that's the terms we used. And we've come up with our principles, but these principles require balance. So we need to look at all the different implications of our initiatives to increase the housing options, support and ease of implementation, while at the same time cherish what the community loves and retain that character of Oak Bay. So yeah, I think I made this really clear now, but this target portion of the grant application is a bit of an unusual requirement and would set the stage for some of our projects. With that, in closing, there's recommendations for you. Let me see, next slide. These are the next steps. So the submission deadline is August 18, I believe. And the funding agreement would be signed off in the fall if we're successful. And if successful, we need to update the scope and timing of our projects, and that probably touches other projects as well. Update workforce plans for different departments. And also we would need to include that Housing Accelerator Fund and make changes to budget allocations to cover the change in scope and timing of our projects. And that brings us to the recommendations. So for that reason, the recommendation is a little bit wordy because we wanted to make sure that we capture all those implications properly, and that it's clear that if we submit a grant application on this basis, then if we're successful, we would report back to you with the resulting changes to all these different documents and planning that we have for the coming years. And alternatives today for your consideration are to make changes to the scope of the application itself, or to give any other direction that you want to give. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Director Bull. And before we come to this table, just a reminder for anybody on Zoom from the public who would like to speak when we come to I think there's a number online that tells them to call in, the 1-855-703-8985. And then when we're ready for public input, we can go to you then. Right now, though, I will come to this table. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this or to have any questions for Mr. Bull? I'll go to Councillor Smart first.
Well, thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor. I guess my first question is with regards to the potential for this to add capacity, which has been noted as potentially our number one issue in having struggled to deliver the housing needs in our community. Can we fund additional staff through this program? Can you just clarify that?
Yes, through the chair, the funding can be used to support those projects in the applications. That includes staffing.
Thank you. Is that it, Councillor Smart? Okay.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful. I'll let other people speak and go around the table.
Anybody else wish to? Councillor Green?
Thank you, and through you to Mr. Bull, and thank you again for the synopsis and the very comprehensive report, to you and Ms. Morden, actually. I just wanted to ask, was there an impact analysis or consideration done on the impact of this kind of growth in terms of units on emergency services, so fire, police, schools, recreation, those kinds of, the emergency services were the first two, and then the other services required to support an increase in population at this rate. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Bull.
Yeah, through the chair, we haven't really reviewed those kind of implications, really focused on what is possible, what connects to our program. So those would be things to consider subsequently, and it's probably one of those implications that would need to be considered down the road as we do other plans.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online? Mayor Murdoch or Councillor Watson? Murdoch, go ahead.
Unmute myself. Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just so I'm absolutely clear on what it is we're talking about. There's a couple of things. One, I noticed in that spreadsheet on the presentation, it laid out anticipated numbers of both infill and other types of housing. And when we're setting these targets, are we beholden to those numbers, or is it sort of the total number of units that we're going to be held accountable to for success? I'm just curious about how they actually measure at the end of this term.
Thank you. Director Bull or? No?
Thank you, Chair. So our understanding of the program is that 25%, if we're approved, 25% of the approved amount would be advanced in this coming fall. And then an additional 25% in 2024, 25% in 2025. And during those 2 years, year 2 and year 3, they would be looking at our progress towards our targets. And it's the final 25% increment that they may be adjusted depending on whether or not we're meeting the targets. So that's how it's been explained to us from CMHC. And anything to add? Okay.
Thanks.
That's helpful. Thank you. So it's not so much a worry of the exact pieces at this point in terms of the types, so then I guess the two primary questions, and through Chair, I guess this is the staff. The two big questions we need to answer tonight are: one, do we submit? Because obviously it's a substantial shift in staff work, but also an opportunity for money. And two, if yes, we are planning to submit, what are the 7 priorities that we want to include within that? And maybe if you don't mind, I'll just add my follow-on if those are correct. Does it commit us to those initiatives, i.e. to changing zoning from single to duplexes across the district. Are we committing ourselves to that particular priority, even if something different might come along?
Thank you. Through you to staff. I'll go to Ms. Morden.
Thank you, Chair. So my understanding is yes, once we've outlined the 7 initiatives in the half housing action plan, that does commit the municipality to undertaking those initiatives.
Thanks. Anything else, Mayor?
Okay. Just so we do have to name those 7 priorities within this this direction tonight, correct?
We're getting a nod from Ms. Morden.
Okay, I'll take that. I can actually see that on the screen, so
Oh, there you
the
go.
technology works.
Okay.
I think those are my only real questions here. I have some thoughts. And I guess one question I might have is there's one of the 7 is there's joining together both the procedural optimization piece of things as well as the digitization aspect. And I'm wondering, do those have to be conjoined, or could they logically be considered 2 separate? To my mind, they're quite separate projects requiring different skill sets. They're going to tie together, achieving optimization. But within this application, could we separate those 2?
Thank you. Through to you to staff.
Yeah, through the chair, on its own or in itself, yes, that could be done. The reason we included it as a single item, it's a single project right now in our council priority plan. And the other reason that comes to mind is that particular portion of the housing action plan is kind of an incremental increase in housing units. It's not really earmarked to specific units. It's kind of really a very rough estimate of what both of those initiatives together might result in. So I think for the grant application itself, there's probably not much use necessarily in splitting them, because you would also split the anticipated impact and not really affect housing estimates.
Ms. Morton, you wanted to add something?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note that CMHC will only score 7 initiatives, and so we packaged them in a way to get the maximum amount of points available. So if we were to separate them, we would only get scored on 7. We may lose points if we separate that out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. One last, sorry, then that triggers one other question for me on this, and my apologies, Chair. This technology is a bit awkward to jump in. Where is the the one item which touches on infill, which is the secondary, or sorry, the duplex piece of that? Can you staff just maybe explain? We have a pretty accelerated timeline to complete our infill housing piece. Is there a rationale for not just using that as that's sort of in alignment with the process that we've driven out so far, as opposed to making it? I'm struggling with a policy change of that, and I appreciate the argument, and it makes a certain amount of sense that it's similar to having suites, but I'm struggling with it because given the commitment we've made to the public, in my mind at least, to the infill housing process. Can maybe staff explain a little bit about why not just look at accelerating or broader infill housing policy that's already in place, rather than taking one like a duplex and highlighting it?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, or through me to staff.
Yeah, through the chair. I think this idea came about. We had several check-ins with CMHC staff, and they were advising us on what they were going to be looking for. And one of the things that at some point was discussed, actual bylaw changes and commitments to bylaw changes would score better because they are more certain to produce certain outcomes. So in that context, we started thinking about, well, what kind of bylaw changes would fit in our context without getting too far ahead of our programs. And that's where this particular initiative came into being, to allow for duplexes throughout. In itself, it's our estimate right now is 0.1% of that 1.8 total percent growth. So it could be either in or excluded. The other part is for infill housing. The other portion would be the grant program that we haven't really considered. That's a more, that would simply build on whatever the infill housing program would produce. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Mayor Murdoch?
No, thank you very much, Cheryl. Let me just ask questions at this point.
Thank you. I'll go to you next, Councillor Watson. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry, just having a little difficulty with the special effects and the technology. Just a couple of questions. It's kind of continuing on the line of questioning about what the 7 initiatives are, because I was a little bit confused, because initially I thought the focus was on the 7 priorities right out of the 7 items right out of our existing priority plans, and then the other things were added as additional items. So maybe I'm not following that. Our staff suggesting that of those additional items, one of which was this duplex zoning, actually replace one of those priorities? And if so, which one would be dropped to bring us back to a total of 7? So that's my first question.
Thank you, and I'll go to staff.
Yeah, through the chair, it's the 7 initiative plus the additions. So the incentives for both projects and some of the zoning and the other add-ons, so to say, there are meant to be add-ons because that's how the program is set up. The district is outlining its own housing action plan. Those are the 7 initiatives. And then there are certain measures that need to be submitted as part of the grant application that accelerate that housing supply growth. And that's where those additional elements come into play. So they're combined, they're on top of our planned projects.
So thank you. So I guess what I understood from Ms. Morden then is that gets you more brownie points, as it were. If you add on things that get you potentially better results, then that gives you more points on your application. Is that just correct again? Can you just confirm or clarify?
I'm seeing nods, but I'll let Ms. Morden answer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the minimum growth target we would have to meet is 1.1%, and I think the advice from CMHC was any way in which we can accelerate or add to any one of the 7 initiatives to boost that even beyond the 1.1%, we will be more competitive.
Thank you. And then just finally, are there any hints yet about what the report, I know what the reporting frequency is, but what the actual reports themselves will look like? Because that is, again, another piece of staff work that would come along with this, I guess, annual first quarter report and then annual reports afterwards. Any idea what the contents of those reports are going to look like?
Thank you. Through to staff.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Primarily building permit issuance, but we haven't seen what else CMHC might require. I think those details are still a little bit tentative.
Thank you. Is that it, Councillor Watson?
Yes, thank you. I'll put my hand down now.
Thank you. Councillor Paterson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Mr. Bull. I just would like to clarify if, because this is done in stages, what are the commitments on the parties? So, i.e., if we are failing to make the progress that it was desired to be made to keep up pace with this program, if we were failing at any stage, could the commitment by CMHC to continue to fund us, could that be withdrawn? And the second part of that question is, if this district failed to deliver on the commitments, and it affected the grant stream amounts available, how then is coming out of that, my impression is then it would be the community that would be committing to funding things like extra salaries and whatnot if we didn't get the grant funding. Is that correct?
Through to staff.
Yeah, through the chair. We haven't seen the funding agreement itself just yet, but the one clear indication is that the first 3 tranches of funding seem to be, once you're approved, you'll get those, and it's really specifically the last installment of 25% that will be subject to review. In terms of what happens if that last quarter doesn't come, or maybe the funding agreement has other caveats that we're not aware of yet, that would be something to consider, because it is kind of a risk management what we need to do at that point in the future, setting up whatever we set up to execute or deliver on the grant program scope of work. It's a fair point. I think that we need to think about is that, for example, in this case, staff, is that connected specifically to the project, or is it integrated with other staffing, regular staffing? We don't know all those details yet, but definitely something to consider down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paterson.
Thanks. Thanks for that information. And through you, Chair, just a follow-up. It's a federal program designed to produce 100,000 new middle-class homes in a very short turnaround time. And the dwellings are to be designed to be affordable, inclusive and diverse communities that are low carbon and climate resilient. And I think some of those aspects are, our housing, the housing infill plan that we're working on, and certainly secondary suites, I think we made good progress towards what our goals are as a community to improve those things. What we are committing to submit on the grant, I don't see that it speaks particularly to the affordability piece of what the national program is attempting to achieve by this, which is a really rapid turnaround in producing affordable homes for Canadians. And so if you could just speak to that, because I don't think those things have been clarified within our programs.
Thank you, and through you to staff.
Yeah, I think on the part of staff, it's clearly aimed at housing supply in general. It does have the tiers in funding, so there's some incentivizing there. But I think it's a fair observation. Mr. Begin?
Yeah, good evening, Worship. Members of Council, I was just going to add that, I think that's what CMHC may be looking for when they're comparing municipalities to municipalities as to how municipalities are tackling the affordability issue as part of their applications. And so different municipalities may be putting forward different programs on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Councillor Paterson? No. Before I go to second-time speakers, any first-time speakers? No? Okay, I will go back to Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you, Acting Mayor. Through you to staff. I guess my question is, if it is the desire of council to accelerate housing to make up for that 10-year delay in implementing infill housing that was outlined in the OCP, and to really start addressing what we heard in the election, what could we do alternatively if we did not pursue this fund to gain staff capacity and to meet that lovely bar graph that you showed that makes up for lost time? Is there another option, or is this at the moment the best way forward to address our community's needs?
And I'll go to Ms. Director Bull for that.
Yeah, and I'll invite my colleagues to chime in if they have insights. From my perspective, for our existing council priority projects, we have identified funding, and particularly the Growing Communities Fund has given us quite some flexibility there. That's a positive element. I think on that front, we have confidence that we can work towards those projects, and as the year goes by, we'll probably adjust every year, but that has been put in motion now. So I think there are other options to execute our own plans, so to say. But of course, without federal funding, it would be very challenging to try to execute a program like we've outlined for the grant application, an accelerated program, because there's simply other projects and priorities as well that have been identified that also will need some of our existing and upcoming staff capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask one question, which would be, obviously this is a huge project, so looking at our council priorities, what does this mean to our council priorities? Because if we took something like this on, in my head, all I can think about is that we would have to put other things on the back burner while this is getting done. Even with hiring more staff, etc., there's still going to be a pull on the staff that we have and the priorities that we already have in the mix. So I wonder, have we considered what priorities would have to go on the back burner while we went ahead with this? Sure, who's going to tackle that one?
Do you want to?
I guess from my perspective, I would say that anything that isn't really a housing focus may need to be put on the back burner, and the priorities will be those that help to assist in providing more housing, would be my initial thought. Perhaps Chris or Mr. Ball had other thoughts?
Yeah, and I think to mention two specific examples, for example, the greenhouse gas retrofit program is a climate initiative, and also there's a pending project that needs to be further detailed around another grant program with our own funding that is sitting and waiting to be used. So those are two specific projects that are clearly not housing related that would fall down to the similar team that needs to respond to this grant. So there would be an impact there in the short run. I think we can adjust to that, but it will take time to adjust those. So I think that's the reality of this. Thank you.
And Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Chair. And I was just going to add to that, sort of just at a higher level, is there really hasn't been an organizational conversation about what those implications are. This has all come together fairly quickly, unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be. And so, I think part of that is that if the grant application was put in and was successful, that there really would be that full analysis necessary about what really has to fall away, or what resources have to be added or repurposed, or all those things, and just throwing the reality into the conversation is that adding resources is not a fast solution to a problem. It's a number of months to go through recruitment process. There's a lot of competition in the market, as we've discussed with council before, and so all of these things factor into this, and there's a little bit of quickness to this process, and so we would have more work to do, clearly, to get a stronger sense of what the truest implications would be.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Councillor Green, but just a reminder to the public that we will be coming to you next. So Councillor Green, and then we'll go to the public.
Chair, are you looking for comments as well, or just questions at this point?
I think just questions until after we get from the public, and then we'll go to comments.
Okay, thank you. Through you then to Mr. Bull, Mr. Green, Ms. Morton. There is, in the report, there is a statement about preempting community engagement. Could you clarify what that actually means? Is that referencing the lack of public hearings? Does that mean that we will not be consulting with community associations, neighborhood or resident associations on the direction this is taking? Would you mind clarifying that for me? Thank you.
And Mr. Bull.
Yeah, through the chair, it specifically is about the housing supply growth target that would be part of the application, because it would set a target for the increase in housing in Oak Bay. That particular target becomes like more of an FYI for the community, although some of the details will be discussed with the community, like if you're talking about the zoning changes for duplexes or related to secondary suite readiness, those would likely still follow they would still need to follow the regular bylaw process. But what I was trying to articulate in the report is that there is a certain element of preempting that discussion, because it's about the target. We need to implement the targets, and similarly for the infill housing program, the details of the program probably need to be informed by this higher housing growth target than would be there otherwise. So we're, in short, I think, maybe in different words, as staff, we have some hesitation that through the grant application we are committing to a higher level of growth we would otherwise have arrived at as a community and as a council and an organization, have we followed our own processes.
Thank you.
So I think what I heard was that we would make a decision on the numbers prior to the community being consulted on that number. And okay, thank you. Councillor Green.
Through you, Chair, just an ancillary question. Do we actually have control over that part of this program? Do we control the targets and the numbers or not? Because it raises an existential question about local governments generally, because 97% of our work is land use. But if the federal and provincial governments are looking to overtake or are looking to supplement some of that role, I'm just wondering what controls we will have at the end of the day. Thank you.
Mr. Bull.
Yeah, through the chair, I think in the case of this federal grant program, we are discussing today what kind of submission we would make. So we are in control of that particular target, and there is some flexibility in establishing how it would be implemented down the road through the 7 initiatives. The housing target from the province is a bit of a different story and a separate process. We don't have information that just yet today, but that would be a different target that would be set by the province. We don't know exactly what it is. But this particular one for the grant program, it's up to us to determine the target that we want to propose, and then it would be up to us down the road to figure out different ways to achieve the target. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
And one final question, sorry to take so much time, but through you to Mr. Bull, and this may be more of a rhetorical question. Is the federal program, the CMHC program, are they talking to the province of BC? Is there a relationship between them, and are they both on a similar page in terms of their policy decisions and how grants roll out and that kind of thing? I'm just wondering what the working relationship, if any, is between the federal and provincial government. Thank you.
Director Bull.
Yeah, through the chair, it's quite clear from our discussions about this program and potential relations to the provincial initiative that the federal government is running their own program. This is a federal program that is not coordinated with the province of BC's pending process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking on Zoom and I don't see any hands raised from anybody on Zoom from the public to speak, and I'm looking to staff to see if there's anybody that is called in. Nobody that is called in. So, Councillor Green, I believe that you were wanting to go move something forward, or no? Sorry, is that?
Sorry, not at this point. Thank you. I'd like to hear colleagues' comments. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll come back here for discussion and then we'll move to motions. So we can go to comments now. Councillor Paterson and then Councillor Smart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And you know, it's always nice to have consideration of grants, but I see that this program, there's a lot of unknowns, certainly in what has been presented yet. And having watched the Rapid Housing Initiative that went forward with another federal initiative in 2020, only the province of Saskatchewan completed with 100% success. The other provinces that enrolled had, well, they struggled. They struggled a lot. And so I certainly applaud the federal government in coming forward with this and what they are trying to achieve. I also know that the communities that did not meet complete success with the 2020 program will all be reapplying for this. They learned a lot through that. And certainly Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and some parts of Ontario are the leaders. And as we said, the program is oversubscribed. But they already have integrated and advanced design build approaches. They have land, they have resources, and they have agreements already in place between the province, many local communities, and First Nations. So my feeling is that our likelihood of being successful, given the constraints that we have within this community and in the broader marketplace also, in the fact that we turn our attention to this and we don't stay focused on where we're going with our planning, I see it as a detraction that's probably not going to achieve the results. And certainly wearing my my hat for Canada, the desirable target of 100,000 new dwellings that are designed to be affordable, inclusive, and in diverse communities that are low carbon and climate resilient is highly desirable. And I think as Canadians, we all want to contribute to that, and we do through our taxes to the federal government's plans on this. So I had real difficulty in supporting putting in an application, only because I think that there are communities who are so much better positioned to actually deliver on the outcomes of what is intended. And there are millions of Canadians right now waiting for the government to deliver on the type of housing that this program is to produce. So I struggle to find a rationale as to why we would put forward an application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paterson. I'll go to Councillor Smart and then Watson.
I will be supporting putting forward a grant application for this. It's not perfect. Nothing is perfect, but it is $6 million, and we need to accelerate our housing supply. We've already decided as a council that housing is important. The community, it was their number one issue during the election, and we need to do something different, and we need to do something quicker, and we need capacity, and we need money to do that. And I see this as largely representing things that we have already committed to. And I think, with a little bit more discussion, and we could add some amendments to this. I've heard a lot from the community for the last few months, supporting going ahead with this program, and for the youth in our community that don't have a hope of owning a house, I think we need to do this.
Thanks, Councillor Smart. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to say, first of all, I just want to turn to the staff and thank them for pulling out all the stops in order to bring this before us before the end of before our summer recess. I know it was a lot of work involved to do this. I know that I was really excited when I attended AVIC and I heard about this opportunity. It seemed very complicated. There was a lot to be done, but I think it is probably worth doing. And what I think this presents to us as a community, if we agree, and I would be supporting a motion to go forward with this application, but these are stretch goals for Oak Bay. They're ambitious, but I don't think they're cavalier. What this does is package up a bunch of things that we've already said we're going to do. It aligns with our strategic priorities and gives us a huge funding boost in order to go about doing them, enabling much more rapid advancement of a housing mandate that is really required of us, both from our own community, bottom up, and also top down now from the province with the housing targets that they're about to announce in the next couple of weeks. So I think that it really behooves us to go forward with this. I do understand Councillor Paterson's reservations about whether we're an ideal community, given all the others that may be more advanced than us to make an application. But many communities in Canada are in the same boat as us. And so I don't think that should say that we should step back. I think we should step boldly forward. If we're rejected, then it was a good effort and we've learned from that. But if we don't make the effort, I think that also speaks, that action itself speaks volumes about our desire around meeting really important housing mandate that we have been given both by our community and by the province. So if a motion, I hope we get to at some point where we have a motion to support putting this application forward, and I would be supporting that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. And I really appreciate everyone's comments. I wonder if, may I make a recommendation when dealing with this, with staff recommendations? Are we going to separate out the move to receive the report, and then are we dealing with the other two recommendations separately or together?
It's at the will of council what we do with that. We will deal with receipt on its own, and then we could separate those two. I think I'm looking at Mr. Coates. Yeah, we could definitely separate the two if that's the will of council.
Well, before I make any further comments, I'm willing to move to receive the report.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. No discussion usually on receipt, so all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate all the work that was done to get this report ready in a very short time frame. I also appreciate all the comments I've heard so far. And I also first want to say that I support housing incredibly. And I do that because I know so many people that are struggling finding housing, and I know a lot of people that are housing vulnerable. Unfortunately, though, Oak Bay has other very big issues on its hands. The two biggest issues are affordability and land values. The third, more concerning issue is the lack of public land on which to build quote-unquote affordable housing. So what I don't want us to do is to raise, again, expectations on the part of the public and promise them that that this is going to enable us to provide affordable housing in Oak Bay, because I remain to be convinced on that issue. I think the Housing Accelerator Fund is a terrific federal program. I'm concerned, though, that it is not somehow connected to what the province is doing and requiring of us. I'm very concerned about the public land gap in Oak Bay, that we have very little, if any, public land on which to build affordable housing. I'm concerned about the investor market and the Airbnb proliferation that's occurring in this community that is affecting housing. I was just made aware of an Airbnb in Oak Bay. It was a permanent rental at $3,000 a month. They've just converted it to an Airbnb. It is now earning $6,000 a month for the owners. So that's a big concern. And I'm also concerned about the proliferation in staff that we need to create and achieve. I counted 7 departments, and that will be up if we go, say, 2 to 4 per department. That means we have to staff up between 20 and 35 staff over the next time period to achieve the goals of the half funding. I'm also concerned about the impacts on emergency services and infrastructure. Do we have the infrastructure to support this kind of increase in housing units? And I'm not so sure. I think Runnymede is a good example of where there was a subdivision and the infrastructure wasn't there to support it. So I don't know that. And these are some of the questions that I feel need to be answered. I'm also concerned about the tax implications post the grant funding period. To sustain now a hugely increased staffing situation to support this funding period, and then after the funding is dispersed, what happens at that point? How do we support the infrastructure that's been created to support the grant funding program? I'm also concerned about environmental impacts potentially on this kind of rapid increase in housing units. And finally, I am concerned about a 15% growth expectation over the next 10 years. Can we achieve that? I don't know that, because there are some big obstacles for Oak Bay. Again, affordability, land values, and building costs. There are also cost implications for homeowners, for this kind of accelerated funding program. Are homeowners able to shoulder the cost of adding square footage or adding units to their existing homes or to new homes? I don't know that either. And I guess my other concern is the community engagement side, which is, it's stated in the report, this will preempt our ability to communicate and dialogue with our community on some of these really important and serious issues. We've also made a commitment to our own housing plan. We are expecting housing targets from the province. We don't know what those are. So it feels as though we're heading into a marathon without having done the required physical training. And that worries me, because if we're going to make a grant application, it would be nice to make it a successful application. And so those are my concerns and my reservations. It isn't about housing, it's about a process that I think lacks clarity, and a process that is putting incredible pressure on a very small community like Oak Bay that, as Councillor Paterson has pointed out and others have pointed out, is not fully prepared to take on this kind of commitment. And then having made those promises and commitments and not achieving them is even worse. And we have a public that is hugely disappointed, and we don't have the housing that we need. And I think Councillor Braithwaite's point about what about the rest of our strategic priorities that we spent so much time on identifying and then ranking, what happens to all of that work? So it's a concern. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll go to Mayor Murdoch next.
I'll speak with the microphone on. There we go. So the motion on the floor right now is to receive, but I guess you're okay if we make a couple of comments more broadly on the report, Chair?
Actually, we already passed the motion to receive, so we are just
Oh,
taking
that's
more
right.
broad
Okay.
comments. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm happy to make the motion as it's laid out here, though I am going to propose a couple of amendments after the fact. So the report that's the recommendation, the staff recommendation here that we submit a grant application to the Housing Accelerator Fund, and if the grant application is successful, so those two parts.
Are you making that motion?
I'm happy to make that motion.
Okay.
Then
Okay,
I'll speak to that motion.
There's a seconder. Okay, so you can now speak to it.
So there's a couple of things here I think that are really important. And one, maybe I'll just there's a technical question I struggle with a little bit. One, this is to staff, is the question really is how do we? There's a one of the priorities of this is to require suites, suite readiness in new builds. And I'm just curious about the practicality of that. If people are building, say, they have a small lot, they're building a small home with, say, 1,000 square feet or something on that. Practically speaking, how would we require a suite readiness in that scenario? Would we require them to build a bigger house than they want? Would we require them to have a basement if they didn't want one? That wording, it's not common, but it does happen where people want to build small homes. Or may want to build a home with the intention of in future adding a secondary building in the back and may not want to have a suite for that reason. Could you just could staff just talk to that one priority?
Thank you, and through to staff.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have some ideas, but that particular part is, of course, is not detailed yet, and we haven't looked at how we would implement it in our bylaws. But suite readiness, it comes down in terms of definitions. We're used to exclude suites, so and that hinges on the kitchen. That used to hinge on the kitchen. The second kitchen would be a reason to consider a house having two residential units. So this would be the opposite of that. So we would be looking particularly for a second kitchen somewhere in that proposed house. We've seen housing increases have increased over time. So there would be more details needed for the program. But between the kitchen and some other building code requirements around kind of the preliminary separation between those units for the possible future use of a secondary suite, that would be along the lines of what we're considering. Not sure if Mr. Green wants to add here.
Yeah, I was just going to add it. It's a little bit like the accessibility readiness or the adaptability of a future house. So ensuring that it can be adaptable in the future. So we haven't scoped this out in terms of detail or got any definitions lined up for legal review, but what we're thinking is this will be very similar to the solar ready or adaptability readiness, that it could be as simple as ensuring that there may be a room that in the future that could have that it would have the conduit for a 220 volt, so that there could be a cooking facility in that room in the future. So it could be or the ability for the garage to be converted into a suite in the future, so that again that garage could be converted into a suite in the future. So it was just trying to be ensure that we could look at future readiness of single family dwellings in the future to make them more easily adaptable in the future for extended families or for rental income in the future if that house ever changed hands.
Thank you. Mayor
Thank
Murdoch?
you. Okay, thanks for that answer. So here's my thoughts on this. One, the comments made by Councillors Paterson and Green are bang on, honestly. I think that we have so many other priorities. This could be very disruptive to our work plans. There's lots of concerns attached to that. And I have, and I'll speak to a couple of those. And I also just want to recognize, and I think for both council and staff and the public to know, there's a very good chance we won't be successful in this application. I think as staff have pointed out, we're a borderline case and probably not the intended type of community at this fit. So I appreciate them trying to find an approach that gives us a chance on this one. But I look at it this way: the only way that we could scale our staff, which is part of that, but also this application really ties to providing incentives. When we're talking about $30,000 to $40,000 per unit, that gives us opportunities for incentives that we wouldn't have without this grant funding. And it's applicable to fund infrastructure, which again we may not be able to fund to support growth without. So, and talking about grants of the scale, which is in the scale of $6 million. So I do think we should apply for the grant, and hence my motion. But I will say that I don't think we should be making commitments in this grant application that bypass the public on significant policy changes. I don't think chasing a grant is a good reason to undermine what I consider to be pretty fundamental parts of our decision making, especially as it relates to land use. So I'm sorry. I guess I moved it. I don't know if it was even seconded. But was
Councillor Appleton
probably should have paused at
seconded
that point. Okay, it was seconded. Thank you. So I will. I'm going to suggest, and I'm happy to come back because I have some suggested wording on this. But I would suggest that perhaps we need something that includes language around secondary suite readiness where possible. Would probably be one, because I think that we have to just be realistic that there might be some new builds that are just too small to accommodate a secondary suite. That may not be necessary, but I think that's probably worth looking at. And I think that we need to change the duplex policy to be in alignment with what we've already committed to doing, and change it from implemented broad duplex to implement regulatory changes to enable identified infill housing options. With that particular change, I would be willing. I'm going to be supportive of the grant application. If we can't remove that duplex policy, I can't support the motion. Just to be clear. But I think best practice here is you make the motion that the staff recommend, then you move amendments. So I'm going to just make that. I'm going to move an amendment at this point, and that is to change the policy included from implementing blanket duplexes to implement regulatory changes that enable identified infill housing options.
I think you're going to have to speak a little slower so that
Yep, no, I'll
Mr.
repeat that.
Coates can start typing. So if you could just repeat that slowly, please.
I'm happy to. So my suggested amendment is that we change the duplex policy identified to quote to wording that says implement regulatory changes to enable identified infill housing options. By identified, I mean in our infill housing program so far.
Mr. Coates, are you able to? I think Mr. Coates actually managed to get all of that, so I'm sure he's going to pull it up on the screen, so we should see it momentarily.
Ooh, nice vote.
Be able to see that, Mayor Murdoch?
Identified, yeah. No, that to enable. No, identified.
Identified.
And so for clarification, that just refers to the infill housing options that we've already identified in our. We're 2/3 of the way through an infill housing process, so this is just.
And there was a second part to that motion, Mayor Murdoch?
No, I think that's the key change for me, is that just changing that the duplex policy that's within this report and changing it to implementation of the regulatory changes that enable. I just want to move this from making a broad policy change to tying it to already identified infill housing priorities that we've identified.
And so does that includes the suite readiness aspect, does it?
It leaves the suite readiness alone at this point. I would be curious to hear if other people feel that that's a concern or not. I took some solace from the councillor staff's answer that is still to be worked out what it would look like, and we could probably deal with it after the fact.
Okay.
So this is really the only one that's a game changer for me.
Okay, so the amendment that we have on the table is change the duplex policy to implementation of the regulatory changes that enable the identified infill housing options. Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Appleton. And Councillor Appleton has a question.
Just thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering whether we might, just as a friendly amendment here to the amendment, thank you, whether or not we might just make specific reference to attachment 2. The council or the staff recommendation as attached to the report and as associated with the report, it refers specifically to attachment 2, proposed HAF grant housing plan. So this is an amendment within attachment 2. So I'm just wondering whether we could just specifically reference attachment 2, and then that connects it to the original motion.
That's a positive change. Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so it now has the attachment 2 in there. Any reason, any indication to motivate there, Mayor Murdoch or Councillor Appleton?
I would just take away of the in front of regulatory, the implementation of regulatory changes. Yeah, enabling it. Yeah, that's good for me. So my motivation on this one, I think I've already said it. I really struggle with us. We're here at a meeting, a special council meeting. We have no public attending. We have no public comment. And we are looking at, a pretty fundamental shift that sort of supersedes a process that is moving forward fairly quickly and is anticipated to be finished, we hope, this year. And that will give us a multitude of options. And one of those may be that we actually implement duplexes across the thing as a baseline. That may be one of the options we consider. I just don't want to supersede that without the opportunity for the public to at least have some say in the matter, and not to, it feels too much like we're undermining our own process by jumping around it just for a grant application. This really struck home to me when the question was answered. Yes, it binds us to these policy changes, and binding ourselves to policy changes just for a grant application seems the wrong approach. So hence this change.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Appleton next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I appreciate this being brought forward because I think that the duplex piece in attachment 2 did stick out for me as being something that had been contemplated as a potential component of the infill strategy, but hadn't been concluded upon in the formal process. So I think it's better in this case to broaden it out to those things which have been discussed with the public as far as infill housing concepts. Allows us a little bit of a broader reach to be able to explore those things. So, yeah, I think that this is a useful amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you, and I too appreciate the intent of ensuring that we're getting community feedback on this. I guess what I'm wanting just to clarify is, when I'm looking at the wording on page 18, like, is it as simple as basically striking the 2 words, specifically duplexes, and still potentially keeping in the permitting some of the lower density housing options by right across the district? I'm just wondering if it can still, in a sense, remain a sort of strong statement that is unspecific, or if you're looking at striking the whole concept of any density by right, just for clarification.
I guess I'll go to you, Mayor Murdoch.
Sure. Sorry. Can you just refer to the page number that you're speaking to? Just I'm a suboptimal setup here in a hotel, working off the small screens, etc. So can you just point out which one you're which?
Yes, it depends which view you're in, but it says page 18 of 24 on the side of attachment 2.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, on my page 18, it doesn't. It just speaks to broadly about the infill housing strategy. Is that the page you're talking to?
No, this is the specific list of it's attachment 2, and it's the specific list of all of the 7 strategies. I could read the component for you. It says, firstly, immediate actions could take the form of adopting an infill housing zoning amendment permitting some of the lower density housing options by right, specifically duplexes, across the district early in the HAF program.
I think it's CPP number 5, Mayor Murdoch.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you. So, so just for my perspective, through you, Chair, my intention here is that those permitting some of that some density housing within the infill housing by rights is, I think, a part of best practices for allowing us to speed up development. So it is included. That's how I see this rolling out as one of the potential ways of implementing. But in this case, we've identified just duplexes and jumping ahead of the queue on that one. So I don't want to take away that potential as part of our infill housing strategies. But I do want to I don't want to, again, preempt just one of those housing forms in this way. So the language that's in here, to my mind, is reasonable. I don't want to throw it out. I just look at this number 5 speaks broadly to those things. In this case, it's duplexes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Smart.
Thank you for that clarification, and with that clarification, I would support the amendment.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'll speak. This is really difficult because I know I'm only speaking to the amendment, but I've listened with interest about everybody's arguments around this whole thing. As far as the amendment goes, I understand where the mayor is trying to go with the amendment, but I have difficulty again in relation to the main motion, because I do think that doing something like this, putting this application in, would actually cause us to lose focus on our other priorities within the municipality. So I think I'm struggling with this, but I believe I'm going to be voting against the amendment. Anybody else have anything to say? Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. This is a really tough one because the intent of the application is an important intent. But I have to be honest, I don't want to mislead my community and say that this will enable us to build affordable housing in Oak Bay. I can't say that. And I can't make that kind of commitment, and no amount of grant funding is going to enable affordability unless other parts of that puzzle are changed or put into place. I'm also concerned about the capacity of our staff and the planning department, I have to say. This is a tremendous amount of pressure on them, with another pressure cooker coming from the province in a month or two. We still don't know what that pressure cooker looks like. And we are a small community. We are not a huge planning department. And I commend you for doing so much around this application to begin with. But I worry about delivering on the other things that we identified in infill housing, on secondary suites, and on duplexes. I worry that if this pulls us off in a direction that in 4 years' time we still don't have what we need or want in terms of housing in this community, it will be a huge disappointment, not just for the community and the people in it that are affected, but for ourselves as decision makers and for staff as well. And let's not set ourselves up to fail, I guess would be my ultimate statement. And red flag. The other issue, I talk to a lot of people as well on housing. We have people in our community that, first of all, couldn't afford to live here now had they not bought their homes 15 years ago or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. Their biggest stress right now is being able to stay in their homes, being able to afford to stay in Oak Bay. And so there, you know, we have it's such a complicated problem. And I stress a lot about it because I know a lot of people on the edge who are vulnerable. Either they can't stay here or they're worried about the future and their ability to stay here. So I guess I just have to ask, there's so much noise around housing right now, external to our council and external to our municipality. We really need, though, to focus internally on the housing needs in this community. I hope this grant might do that, but unfortunately, because of all of my concerns and the fact that I don't want to make a promise to anyone that I won't be able to keep, I cannot support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick question to Mr. Bull. Mr. Bull, does this amendment reduce acceleration at all?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, it would, because I'm assuming that we would work for our infill housing program in this case and make changes to our bylaws when we are ready to make those changes, unless the intent remains to somehow make changes faster, which we were not contemplating as staff. We thought that the duplex change is something you can do quickly, but to make any other changes for the infill housing program really requires that program to be developed fully with community input. That would be our recommendation, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no other comments, I'm going to call the question on the amendment. Oh, sorry, Councillor Paterson.
Yes, thank you. And I do appreciate the amendment. I don't feel able to support it for a couple of reasons. But first of all, I just, want to go back to some comments that were made about demonstrating the desire of council to produce more housing. I just want to say that I think around the council table in its entirety, there is a strong desire to, in fact, increase the housing inventory in the district of Oak Bay and provide more diverse housing options for the community. But in fact, I'm so committed to housing across Canada and what we need to produce as a country. That is why certainly I'm more supportive of allowing other communities that actually stand a very good chance of producing affordable housing to have first options on doing this, knowing that we will continue to move forward. But I think also a key principle here where we are changing what we are doing is the fact that we are now then, if this goes through, making a statement that as a council, despite what commitments we have made to the community, despite what we have promised to the community, and developed through strategic plans and priorities and our communications, we are quite prepared as a council then to in fact deviate from all of that without having defined outcomes and more clarification on what this will mean for the next few years going forward, and to do that in a meeting at the end of July without very good public representation here to speak and without having communicated this to the public, I think really takes us down a course that I do find it quite troubling, because I think that it really undermines all of the work that we have done so far in our council term. And I, like Councillor Green, I find it hard to articulate that I believe that this will produce affordable housing within the region, perhaps affordable, and it won't process the money through to the end user, the families that may live in this housing, in the same way that could be demonstrated in other locations. So I have a firm commitment to housing, but I really have concerns with this, so I won't support the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, and just a reminder, we are speaking to the amendment, and I have, I believe, Councillor Watson, and then Mayor Murdoch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting the amendment. I agree with the mayor who said that I don't think we should be making policy changes to support the grant application, and duplexes as of right across the municipality is not something we've discussed yet. So I do support the amendment, and I will be voting for it. And I just want to clarify something. A couple of councillors have made comments that this grant application would not be getting us affordable housing, but that's not what it requires us to do. It just requires us to increase the amount of housing we provide in the community. And I don't want the community to think that we are doing something wrong by asking for this, because it's not about affordable housing. And certainly applications that may achieve more of that in their municipalities may get more points, but you do not have to be saying that you're going to be providing affordable housing to apply for this grant. So I think what applying for it does will keep us focused on the priorities we've already selected as a body. We have 7 housing things we said we were going to do, and this application speaks to every single one of them and says that we will stay the course and we'll stay focused on them. So I'll be certainly voting for the amendment and hopefully then voting for the main motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have Councillor Green.
Just one last comment. It is actually about housing affordability overall, and that is correct. But it's also about housing security, and that's the other side of the face of housing in our region, is housing security. Rental housing is not secure for a lot of people. Rents are approaching $3,000 and $4,000 a month. So this is not only about affordability, it's about security. And that's a huge issue for many, many people. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call the question on the amendments. So all in favor of the amendments? I have Mayor Murdoch, Councillor Watson, Appleton, and Smart in favor, and those opposed. I have Councillor Paterson, Green, and Braithwaite opposed. So now we will go to the main motion as amended. And I think everybody's had a chance to discuss the main motion, I think, except for myself. So I will, I'll go to Councillor Appleton first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Speaking in favor of the motion on the table, this has been an interesting conversation. This conversation about the Housing Accelerator Fund is exactly that. It's an opportunity to accelerate a process that is liable to potentially take too long if we don't have the resources to be able to support it. Creating a goal and a target is exactly what this community needs in my mind. It's not raising expectations, it's giving us something to shoot for, and it's giving us a target to work towards. It moves something from being aspirational into an actual commitment on behalf of the community. Affordability is not the strict goal of this initiative. It's about diversity of housing options. Affordability as a concept is a difficult one to pin down. Everybody's well aware of the housing values in Oak Bay. We need housing diversity. We need housing options for people at all stages of life. So this is a key point. Setting the target is the goal. This Housing Accelerator Fund, we would not be in a position to apply for this fund if we didn't have the initiatives that Council has already signed on to and already prepared. The underlying 7 projects that underlie this project are all things that Council has developed and committed to. They are things that we intend to do. They are things that this Council's worked hard on and has worked hard on getting the public's buy-in on. So things like secondary suites, infill housing, examining rentals. These are all major components that we've had significant debate around. This community now expects us to act on them, and we are severely restricted in capacity. We need the funds to be able to do that. We've heard from our staff team that we don't have the ability to accelerate in this way, in any other way than if we're going to get this grant. So this is extremely timely, and I do not see how, when this grant is underpinned by initiatives that we ourselves have developed, that it sits outside of the desires and the intent of the community and our strategic goal to create housing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton, and I'll go to Mayor Murdoch.
Well, thank you, through you, Chair. I thank you, Councillor Appleton, for those words. I think that was the genesis for my support for this, and I appreciate the support for the amendment. Everything else in this, between incentives for secondary suites to help people get those built. The readiness piece, I think, as long as we can be reasonable, is a reasonable one. The only way we can provide things like grants to incentivize building when costs are what they are is to have external money coming in. So that's very supportable with the change to realign with our existing plans around infill housing. That gets rid of that duplex concern. The expedite regulatory changes and incentives are around village area plans. That frees us up to look at options when we're doing our village area planning. Our priority sites piece. If those sites move forward, we're going to need some additional staffing and support for those just to help them move forward and support them. We don't know if this will happen, but certainly I think we need to be prepared and to have extra funds available for that makes sense to me. And the optimization digitalization is already a project priority, and this would just provide funding for it. So, based on what's being asked there, and I do recognize again, I think this is a long shot application, but if we do get it, I think with those changes made, all those strategic initiatives that are being now listed in there, I think all help support accelerating and frankly just funding our ability to actually implement some of these things. So thank you for that. I just wanted to add a little bit of additional motivation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Murdoch. I'm going to go next, and then I think I'll call a question after that. I struggle with this because, like others that sit around the table, I do want to support the housing within our community, but I think that we are supporting housing with the initiatives that we have on our plate right now. And Councillor Appleton, you said that we've already signed up to that. Our community has already signed up and they're prepared to move forward with that. They are, but at the level that we spoke of before, not at this perhaps accelerated level. And that's where it worries me, because I want to be able to go to the public and ask them if this fits in with what their view of our community should look like and should be. So I want to support the housing, but I can't. I don't think I can support this motion because I don't think that this grant was really made with Oak Bay in mind. I think it was made with other communities in mind, as Councillor Paterson said. I think that it's a different approach to land use than what we've ever done before. And I think that when I look at the staffing, we already are in a crunch with our staff right now as far as being able to fill positions that are vacant right now. For us to take something that we were looking at doing over 3 to 5 years and getting the staff up and ready within 3 to 6 months, I think that's going to be a struggle for us if we were by chance to get this grant. And we lack historical knowledge within our staff right now as it is, and to have to then put another burden on our staff and have to ask them to come up with to be able to implement this, I think we lose our focus from our other priorities, I think, and that's the bottom line for me. I do not want to lose our focus from our other priorities. I want to stay the course and do the housing that we have already talked about doing and that we have put in place. So sadly, I'm going to have to vote against the motion. So there you go. Okay, so I'm going to now call the question. So all those in favor, Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologize for interjecting into the discussion, but excuse me, just prior to council voting on that, I just wanted to clarify an earlier remark that sort of, I think, misunderstood some of the reference in Mr. Bull's report around the staff add for this work. It's 2 to 4 across all departments. It wasn't 2 to 4 in a number of different line departments. So, and again, I'm reluctant to interject with this, but I thought it was important to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I didn't mean to say that because I did notice when Councillor Green said that, and I thought it was only 2 to 4. So yes, so 2 to 4 in total. But still, we are lacking in staff within other departments right now. I mean, I don't know how many staff we're lacking right now. You could probably tell me, but to add another 2 to 4 to that, it's going to be a struggle, and the hiring process, in my mind, is longer than 3 to 6 months. Anyhow. I'm going to call the question on the amended motion. So all in favor of the amended motion? I have Smart, Appleton, Murdoch, and Watson in favor, and those opposed? Paterson, Green, and Braithwaite opposed. The motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item, which is 4.
Oh, excuse me, Chair. There
sorry,
is a
yes.
second part of the recommendation that was also important as part of
Sorry.
this program. So
I
if
apologize.
Council could consider that as well, please.
Okay, that was the, and if the grant application is successful, staff report back on the reporting. Okay,
So moved.
okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, Mayor Murdoch, did you still have your hand up? No. No, he didn't. Okay, so that motion passes. Thank you very much. I think we're finished with that item now. We will now move on to 4.2, which is a development variance permit for 1703 Monterey Avenue. Mr. Green, you will be presenting this, I believe, and then we also have Chief McDonald. Oh, sorry, yes,
Yes.
Councillor Paterson.
Yes, Chair, for this item, I will be recusing myself for non-pecuniary issue. I live in the boundaries of the development variance application, so I will just step out for a while.
Thank you very much, Councillor Paterson. I forgot about that. Okay, so we will go to Mr. Green, and I know that we have Chief McDonald here as well to answer any questions.
Yes, good evening, Your Worship, members of Council. This application came before Council on July the 17th, and at that meeting, Council directs its staff to give notice of Council's intent to consider a development variance permit for this site. On July the 18th, a notice was given to all affected property owners. And as of tonight, staff have not received any correspondence on this application as a result of that public input.
Thank you so much. Councillor Green.
Thank you. I'm prepared to move the staff recommendation if you would like me to.
First, I would like to go to the public first to see if there's anybody in the public who would like to speak to this. I don't see anybody on Zoom, and I don't see anybody phoning in for this. So yes, Councillor Green, I will go to you.
That the issuance of development variance permit DVP 00138 to vary the setback provisions of zoning bylaw number 3531 for the property located at 1703 Monterey Avenue for the purpose of constructing a temporary parking structure to house a new fire department ladder truck be authorized.
And a seconder. Yes, we have a seconder. Any discussion? Councillor Green, or Smart.
Oh, thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to staff, I just wanted to ask procedurally, there had been discussions about potentially down the line beautifying the container, whether it be through a public art project or painting or wrapping. And I just wanted to know, is that something that staff will be bringing back at a later date, that we don't have to deal particularly with that part tonight?
Yeah, I think as far as the DVP goes, I think we deal with the DVP first, and then if we want to do something aesthetically for the building, we can bring that up later. We wouldn't tie that into the DVP.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I would agree with that approach, that keep it clean, given that the district does own this site and that the applicant is the fire department. I think it would be more helpful for council to issue the DVP, and then if council wishes to raise a notice of motion or a motion in relation to the form and character of the proposed building, for council to pass a motion to that effect.
Thank you so much. Okay, so anything on the motion that's on the table? Seeing nothing, I will call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. I would also need a motion to receive, please. Seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. So it looks like it's going to go ahead. I think that if we wanted to put something on the table now, Mr. Coates, would that be something along the lines of, is it just that we could ask staff to come back with some ideas on aesthetics for that building, or would you prefer to have a motion?
Chair, I think, in this situation, I think it would be probably best if council were to quickly pass a motion, if that was council's wish, to direct staff to bring aesthetic issues back for council's consideration. And that's with council's property owner hat on. Yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Smart, would you like to do that?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion directing staff to come back with options to beautify the temporary structure.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Green. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Chief, you're going to have a big building in your parking lot. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to number 4.3, which is the Development Application Procedures Bylaw 4844 for 3 readings. And that would be
Acting
Mr.
Mayor.
Green. Yes. Oh, yes.
I want to make sure we had Councillor Paterson coming back in,
Yep,
but we are, so
she's
thank
here. Yep. Okay, so Mr. Green, do you have anything to say on this, or you just want us to go through the recommendations?
I can give a quick overview of some of the main changes. Obviously, a report was brought forward to Committee of the Whole on June the 19th, where this item was introduced to Council. Essentially, what this new bylaw does, first of all, it would replace the current land use procedure bylaw from 2015. And essentially, the bylaw has been drafted to, for a number of reasons, incorporate recent amendments that have been made to the Local Government Act into this bylaw, develop draft procedures to streamline and strengthen the application intake and of complete applications. And then there's also been a number of changes that have been incorporated. First of all, the notion of public hearings, removing the default requirement for a public hearing where the application is consistent with the OCP, again to align with the recent changes to the LGA, acknowledging that Council still has that discretion to hold a public hearing if it so chooses. A requirement for publication missions for those applications where an applicant is seeking to amend an OCP, or where there's a phased development agreement involved, or where there's a heritage revitalisation agreement, a requirement for a public information meeting. In terms of another major change is delegation of notification for development variance permits. So as we just heard on the DVP for 1703 Monterey Avenue, there was a 2-part process, 2 staff reports to Council, and so this bylaw would only require essentially it would delegate the director to issue notification on all development variance permits received. So then essentially what that would mean is that staff, when we receive an application, when we know that the application is ready to proceed to Council, we would then send out the notification letters to everybody within 50 metres and then bring the application to Council for Council's consideration of whether to issue that development variance permit. So streamlining the process in relation to not having to bring 2 reports to Council to do that. And then the third main change is removing fees and charges from the Development Applications Procedure Bylaw. So currently, fees and charges are part of the Land Use Procedure Bylaw. So we're proposing to split those 2 bylaws to allow easier review and updating of fees and charges in the future, as well as giving the opportunity for other departments to add schedules to this bylaw going forward. So again, eventually, the intent will be that we would have a fees and charges bylaw for all departments, so that if we ever wish to make inflationary changes or increase or reduce those fees and charges related to each department schedules, that we can more easily make those changes to those fees and charges. So that's essentially the main thrust of the changes. Happy to receive any questions on the bylaw.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Councillor Green, your microphone's on.
Oh, sorry.
Any questions at all? No, for the Deputy Director? I have a couple of questions if nobody else has questions. Oh, Mayor Murdoch, you can go ahead.
There we go. Not non-responsive text on my screen. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of minor things. It's a broader questions. One, under the definitions, when it talks to commissions, it speaks to an advisory commission established by council bylaw, including advisory planning commission, advisory design panel, and advisory heritage commission. Should that wording be commission or committee? Because we often use committees and even refer to things to like the Park Recreation and Culture Commission in some cases, or committee in some cases. So I guess I'm just looking at that definition. Is that sufficient to say advisory commission if some of our advisory bodies might be committees? And sometimes those change over time. This is page 4 of the bylaw.
I'll go to staff for that.
Thank you. For the chair, I'm looking at the wording, and in the case of the development review, we happen to have the 2 commissions and a panel. But yeah, this in staff's understanding, this wording is broad enough to also support any committees that might be established down the road that would have an advisory role for related to development applications. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you for that clarification. And then I guess just some broader, this is the first time I've delved through a bylaw like this in a very long time. So I guess one of them, if I look at section 6 and 7, delegation of authority, and then the authorization to require development approval information, they both include a really substantial amount of reporting that comes in from applications. And some of that is, of course, us collecting information required by the province. So I'm curious about, by being in our bylaw, does that put the onus on us to ensure that they've met provincial regulation? Or is this just repeating requirements of the province? Where does this, I'm just curious about why in a bylaw we seem to be referring to a lot of things that are, is it a provincial requirement to meet certain things, but we are required to sign off on that as the municipality? So this is specifically, yeah, 6 and 7, that just touches on a number of aspects.
And I'll go to staff for that. Director Bull.
Yeah, thank you for the chair. I'll start and Mr. Green can add, because we did have an extensive legal review on the bylaw. Number 6, I think it covers a number of items you're probably not very familiar with, but by our practice here in the district for over the last couple of years, those has been de facto delegated to staff. And then the item number 7 ones, that's a different collection of things. It's a section called authorization to require development approval information. And that one, I believe, builds on a more generic OCP policy we have. And I think Mr. Green can probably explain why that extensive list is there.
Yeah, on just on point 6 though, first of all, yeah, just to add to what Mr. Ball said, then, you know, yeah, it's being very clear what council has delegated to staff, and at the moment that isn't clearly laid out in our current land use procedure bylaw, so it's just being crystal clear what council has delegated to staff so that there's no no ambiguity around it. In relation to section 7, that's essentially trying to ensure that we have the ability to require that information in a bylaw. I think what municipalities do and what past practice has probably been is that we request things from applicants, and probably the lawyer in me would say that we can request anything we want to, but when we actually legally require something, it needs to be in a bylaw to give us that legal authority to require something. And so this gives us that legal authority when someone says, oh, why do you need a climate change impact assessment, when we can rely on the bylaw to say, yes, we've got the legal authority that's covered in our development applications procedure bylaw to require that study to understand the impact of this development on climate change, so for example. So it just gives us that legal authority to require that information, as opposed to requesting information and essentially trying to not have that confidence, I guess, to require that information.
Thank you. Anything else, Mayor?
Okay. Yeah, so I'll try to be quick here. Just one of the questions I had just was the security of the 125% cost of work estimate security. And I'm just wondering if those numbers, I think, have been traditionally in place, something like that. But if I'm looking at the cost of development these days, where costs, double, tripled. And so that, I'm just wondering, at what point does it become unreasonable to hold, because people often have funding issues where they have to get additional securities. Does that number still make sense from our perspective to have that security? Because they often have to prove their, fiscal availability to cover those, not just their actual direct costs, but their ability to cover these securities.
Thank you.
This is section 6.1, subsection 12.
And we'll go to the staff is just conferring with each other, so here they come.
Through the chair, that's my past experience in other municipalities where we've either required 100% or 125%. That is in line with City Victoria, in line with North Sandwich, where I previously worked prior to here, that we would require a security either through a line of credit or or bonding. But actually, that is our only way to ensure that work, particularly on an environmental development permit, for example, where there's landscaping, the ability to require that, is there a only way of securing that developer follows through with that landscaping? And so currently, I think our bonding is only about a 10% requirement, and what that does is that what we find is that those developers probably pay that 10%, but never actually come back to collect that 10% because it's such a low amount on some big applications. On a lot of applications, we also don't require bonding currently. So, for example, upland siting design, we don't require any bonding in relation to landscaping for upland siting design. This gives us that ability, if we so choose to require bonding, it gives us that ability to require that bonding to ensure that the developer follows through with what they said that they were going to do in their landscaping plans.
Thanks. It sounds like we get to keep that 10% for nothing, but there you go. Anything else, Mayor
So
Murdoch?
that leads into my last question here, and that is just attached to that piece of it. I just was wondering why some of those requirements are in there, like the landscaping plans. I appreciate. I mean, it's down to a detailed planting piece, and I understand it in the sense of the context of the uplands siting and design, in that we're looking for the totality of the picture of what the landscaping is going to look like. But to my understanding, changes to that landscaping do not require any kind of permit. So a future owner or same owner can a month later go around and change all of the landscaping, as long as they're not taking out any protected trees or anything. So I guess my general question on this is, are we overkill here in terms of our detailed requirements on some of these applications, where we're not adding a lot of additional value, and we're adding cost and time on something that doesn't actually require a future permit to change?
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch, and I'll go to staff.
Through the chair, yeah, it may not be required on upland site and design applications where landscaping is generally not part of the permit, but for development permits, environmental development permits, or form and character development permits, then if there is a change to that development permit, then that would need to be either, depending on the nature of the change, either approved by staff if it's a minor change, or if it's significant, it would need to come back to council.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good enough for me for now. I think I'm okay with getting the answers given, but I always worry a little bit that we tend to write a lot of requirements into our bylaws for applications, because there's no risk to us and the cost falls on the applicant. And I just want to make sure that as we're reviewing these kind of bylaw changes, that we're looking at it with the lens of, if these application requirements are fairly minor, but they add months to the application time, those months add tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to applicants. And our single best way of achieving affordability is to reduce our impacts on costs. And so that's the lens I'm looking at these through. And I have some discomfort with some of those requirements or details that are there. I'll say that. But I've probably not enough personal expertise to override the recommendations of staff.
Thank you, Mayor. And
Thank
I have
you.
Councillor Smart and then Councillor Green.
Well, thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to staff. I'm just wondering, with the calls to action and the move for municipalities in BC to require archaeological reports from the province prior to demo, building permit, and planning applications, is staff needing? I gather that's not yet perhaps in our procedures, and I'm wondering if staff needs a motion from council to look at that, and if they do, if now is the timely moment in which to include it in this document.
Thank you. I'll look to staff on that. That might be something that might have to come back later on, but yeah.
Through the chair, the way I would answer that question is, first of all, the archaeology is a provincial remit under the Heritage Conservation Act. Applicants, developers, homeowners need to ensure compliance with the Heritage Conservation Act, and we generally try to put the applicants who may be doing work in sensitive areas or where we think there may be known sites, we will put them in touch with the province through their the department to the archaeology branch to allow them to fill the form in for then the archaeology branch to undertake their own assessment of whether there is archaeological issues taking place. And so we do need to be careful in terms of overstepping the local government's reach, if you like, when in reality it is a provincial remit to ensure authorisation or ensure compliance with the Heritage Conservation Act. You know, that being said, I think we generally, either at building permit stage or in terms of rezoning stage, we do have the ability under the development approval information section in terms of requiring information that we can require further information if we think there's a rezoning application where there is potential for archaeological sites to request that study or to request further information on that issue. But I think I would point out the needs and requirements of the Heritage Conservation Act in the first instance.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Through you, Acting Mayor, it sounds like then if we want to take a leadership role like Salish has in this initiative, that it does need to come from the council table. So I will look into that and bring it back at a further time.
Thank you so much. Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you, and thanks again through you, Chair, to Mr. Bowe and Mr. Green for the report. I've had some inquiries from two members of the Heritage Commission and also from residents in the Heritage Conservation Area on the proposed increases on fees and charges. So that's tables 1 and 2.
I think that's the next item, Councillor Green.
Oh, is it?
not?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're on the...
Oh, yes, you're right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so you're good? Okay, I do have a question, if I might. So we can still ask for a public hearing as council. I'm seeing shakes of yes, so that's good. You know, the delegation of the DVP, so staff can send out the notice, and we can still say no so if staff sends out the notice because they feel that the DVP is acceptable, then when it comes to council, we can still say no, and there's no expectation on the resident that it would have been approved. But how do we know when staff make the decision to reject a DVP, then how does staff make that decision to reject it? And shouldn't that be a decision that's made around this table for rejection rather than at a staff level? Because isn't our role as councillors, as elected officials, isn't most of our role in the land use role? So I have a little bit of uncomfortability there. So can you perhaps touch on, you know, whether or not, how staff know if it has to be rejected, if it's going to be rejected or not, and yeah.
Yeah, the short answer to that is we don't, I guess, in terms of knowing when it will be rejected. I'm just trying to find the section. I can't remember. There is the applicant's right to request reconsideration. So that would be triggered, I guess, if we rejected sending those notices out. Sorry, we would still bring that application to council for rejection. So council would still be the decision-making body on the application.
Thank you, because that was my next question, and was what can a resident do if it's rejected? Are they told, like at the counter, your application is being rejected, your DVP is being rejected, and are they given an option of what their next steps would be?
Yeah, so if we weren't supporting a development variance permit, essentially what we're doing is we're not sending the letters out, but we will still bring the application before council, and at that point, council could agree to send the notification letters out to hear from the public, and then go through that two-stage process of hearing from the public and then a report back to council on what we heard from the public and what staff's recommendation again is on the application.
Okay, thank you. I do like I know it talked in a little bit in your report about the public information meetings. I actually do like that a public information meeting, and if I was reading it correctly, a public information meeting would happen prior to a DVP application being put into staff. Seeing shakes going yes, or actually Director Bull, no.
Sorry, Chair, I should clarify that. So the public information meeting is specifically for a different type of application. So we've outlined in the bylaw that they're required for OCP and heritage revitalization agreements. and they're an option for rezoning applications. But for the development variance permits particularly, the notification and input is hinged on that notification, and then people send in letters or they speak at the council meeting. That's a bit of a different type one, and have application that we would need to be a very unusual type of development variance permit before we would suggest or require the applicant put in an information meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm old school in that I also think that, you know, the reason we're sitting around this table is to make those decisions on those DVPs, so I'm torn on this one. Okay, I'm going to look to the public to see if there's any public information. Mayor Murdoch, you still have your hand up. Are you wishing to speak? No. Yes, you are. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And just your comment triggered, I forgot one other question, probably a bigger question. Just for my clarification on this process, on the public information meeting, I'm very supportive of this being built into our requirements. However, I noticed in the description as I read it, and is that the entirety of the application has to be completed prior to that public information meeting, which means it's quite late in the process, and that they've got a very complete design, they've got a very complete engineering, all those kind of pieces. And so I'm trying to get my head around where is that appropriate public information meeting, because it seems to me it would be better as early as possible so that the applicant can go and speak to the community and get feedback to inform the design that's coming to council. Otherwise, it's essentially a public hearing without the council there to hear the conversation. And so perhaps could staff just talk a little bit about where that actually fits, because maybe I'm misreading the timelines on that. But it seems it's sandwiching after a complete application, and then before it goes to committees for comment, they can have a public information meeting.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'll go to Director Bull.
Yeah, thank you for the chair. I think the information meeting in the bylaw and the connection to a complete application is a mechanism for us, for staff, and also for the district to make sure that when it comes to making an application and starting a formal review process, that application needs to be completed. It needs to have all these components. Now that said, and then in those situations, a full application goes through a formal process. Then the information meeting is required for OCP and HRA, option for zoning. However, I think what maybe the mayor is alluding to is what about a thinking process where the applicant is maybe not entirely sure at what exactly to put on paper, and maybe there is discussions with us. We don't have a lot of those examples in this community, but if there in the future there would be more rezoning, it's more likely scenario that applicants would be exploring options. Nothing is to stop an applicant in that stage, or even for us as staff to suggest a more informal information meeting, if you will, that is outside of that formal before you make a full application. But that's kind of the context why that's so explicitly connected in the bylaw to a complete application. It's also part of, it's a different intent of the bylaw. It combines the desire to have a complete and thoroughly thought through application with an information meeting. But that said, it doesn't stop applicants or staff to suggest earlier on, before when there's preliminary discussions, to suggest a similar approach or use that approach to maybe hash out a particular proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Murdoch, is that good?
I would, yeah, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I'm struggling a little bit with that in that context, the value of a public information meeting. I guess if we're not going to have a public hearing, then it ensures that there's some public content attached to the application when it comes to council. But I guess I'm trying to weigh that off against the confusion if we do decide to have a public hearing, if we're having essentially two public hearings at that point, one with a public information meeting, and then one as a public hearing, which is a much more formalized and clear in regulation and legislation about how we manage those kind of meetings. So can I just get some clarification about what the public information meeting would look like, what the structure would look like, and how we would avoid confusion of people having to go to two different meetings to provide public input if it's at the end stage of the application process? Or, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and I'll go to Deputy Director Green.
Yeah, through the chair, you know, there would always be a public hearing associated with an OCP amendment or a heritage revitalisation agreement. because the legislation hasn't changed in that regard. It's only on zoning bylaws that are consistent with the OCP that a public hearing is not required. And so essentially the public information meeting is for OCP amendments, HRA amendments, or HRA agreements, or phase development agreements, in order to provide that additional opportunity for the public to access that information on those types of application. And then in relation to a zoning bylaw amendment, that's essentially what we're saying is that the director may require the owner to hold that public information meeting prior to council considering an application for a zoning bylaw amendment in order to provide that opportunity for input early in the process. And so with the zoning bylaw, if a zoning bylaw is consistent with the OCP, what would happen is that the applicant may have a public information session. The director may require that information session to be held. But then once the application goes to council, and if staff are recommending approval of that application, what staff would do will be asking council that if in particular it's consistent with the OCP, we were saying that there is no requirement to hold a public hearing. We're recommending that council give first reading and give notice of council's intent to give first reading. So once council gives notice, what we're essentially doing is we would start that public opportunity for comment. We would send letters out to everybody within 50 metres and then bring all that correspondence back to council at first reading, so that there's much essentially bringing that opportunity for comment much earlier in the process than would have happened normally if it was a public hearing, so that that opportunity for public comment is taking place at first reading, and then council at that point in time can either waive the public hearing, or if it's a very controversial application and there's a lot of community interest in the application, council could still hold a public hearing if it so chooses on that application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, and I have Councillor Watson, and then I'll start looking for motions. Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you. This is a question for you, Chair Braithwaite, to staff. Would I be right in believing that this public meeting requirement, or the option to ask for it, has been sort of best practice or good practice in many municipalities throughout BC for a while now? Could you just comment on that, please?
I'll go to staff. Yep.
I think, this is, there's other municipalities that do this, but I think it's just best practice to try and front load the process as early as possible in the process, so that issues that come up in the application can be addressed much earlier in the process. That's what the province is trying to do, is trying to address issues, trying to front load the process, as opposed to what previously happened was that issues would, council give first, second reading, and then a public hearing is held, which is the first opportunity for council and staff to hear from the public on the application. So it's much more trying to front load that process, which in theory should streamline and strengthen the process.
Thank you.
And just further clarification, nothing in this bylaw would preclude the development applicant from having additional meetings with the community if they wanted to do so, correct?
Yeah, through the chair, that's correct. Yeah, this is just setting out the minimum requirements, and so an applicant can always go above and beyond what the bylaw says.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so back to this table. A motion. Looking for a motion to receive by Councillor Green. Seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. And if someone would like to make the other motions.
I'll move the recommendation that development application procedures bylaw number 4844, 2023 be read a first and second time.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Watson, you still have your hand up. I'm assuming that's just a latent hand. Okay. So all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And next recommendation, please. Oh, is that it? Hang on. Third reading. I'm looking for third reading.
Councillor Appleton.
I would move the development application procedures bylaw number 4844, 2023 be read a third time.
And seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you very much. I think we now are moving on to number 4.4, and it looks like, Mr. Green, you're up again. This is the Planning, Building and Development Fees and Charges Bylaw, number 4845/2023. And if you can just give us an overview, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. This report is recommending fees and charges be split from the Land Use Procedure Bylaw. As I previously mentioned, this report was mentioned in the report that went to the Committee of the Whole on June 19th. And since then, we've then sort of refined and created a new fees and charges bylaw that would initially start off with planning fees, building fees, but then eventually other departments may add schedules to this bylaw that will allow the district to much more easily respond and either increase or decrease or add additional fees and charges for services that the district provides. In relation to our current fees and charges for planning, so what we find is that there are a number of bylaws currently where fees and charges are located in, and so this essentially removes all those fees and charges from all those separate bylaws and incorporates them into one new bylaw. Our fees, for particular planning fees, have not been increased since 2015 or even amended since 2015. So there are some changes proposed, some increases, as well as new fees that we believe that we should be charging for services the district provides. And so the intent is to essentially try and recover more of our costs associated with the processing of development applications to ensure that we have a more of a user fee model that applicants pay for the cost of those processing of those applications. Happy to answer any questions that council may have on the report.
Perfect, thank you so much. Any questions for Mr. Green in regards to this? Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry I had the wrong set of notes attached to the other report. On the tables 1 and 2 from the previous, I don't know if those, I'm assuming those haven't changed since our last meeting. Is that correct? Thank you. I had some questions from the Heritage community and also from the Heritage Commission. One of the questions was, and concern, was the Heritage Alteration Permit proposed fee of $1,000. They also did not, I understand, have the opportunity to comment on these changes, and I'm just wondering, was that was there an issue with sending, through you, Chair, these proposed fees to them for comment, or is that something you'd be prepared to do now? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you for your worship. Through the chair, the reason we didn't take these to the Heritage Commission is that, from staff's perspective, it's not the mandate of the Heritage Commission to review fees and charges. So I felt it was important to present these to council first of all, and then if council wished to refer these fees and charges to the Heritage Commission, that will be the will of council to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And the other question was on deconstruction and demolition, and just wondering if I think there was a feeling that the demolition proposed fee might be not large enough to discourage demolition in some cases, and so that was the other question. Was there a thought to perhaps make that a larger fee, or perhaps through you, Chair, you could just quickly outline the rationale for the proposed fee on demolition? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Green is just looking on his computer for those online.
So I remember seeing that question from a member of council last week prior to this item being deferred, and I did make a change to the bylaw in that regard, and so I'm just looking to make sure to see if that change is reflected in my version of the bylaw to try and more clearly incentivize the deconstruction versus the demo permit approach. And so just bear with me to see if that change is reflected in the draft bylaw. almost there. No, it's not. Okay. Yes, so yeah, so there is a slight, I've increased them slightly. Again, I'm in, I guess, council hands with this one. If council wishes to further incentivise deconstruction, then I guess in theory, there's no reason why demolition could be increased or deconstruction decreased to make that gap wider. The district doesn't have a demolition bylaw like the City of Victoria, who have, I guess, more resources to enable that bylaw to come forward. But, the cost of a demolition in Victoria is about 19,000, but you get that back if you go through a deconstruction process, is my understanding of how that bylaw works. But what we try to do is just very notionally encourage deconstruction. So a deconstruction for a service building with a floor area greater than 186 square meters. We've got $300 for deconstruction and $1,000 for demolition. I guess, council could, if it so chooses, wish to increase those or decrease deconstruction costs.
Thank you.
Thank you
Councillor
very much.
Green.
I appreciate that. And I just wanted to quickly explain, I think there has been a concern for a number of years in Oak Bay about the rate of demolitions and the small older homes, which are both more affordable and have a lower carbon footprint in some cases. And people have, and also there's an impact on potentially on the heritage aspects of the community. So I think people were hoping for a harder hit on demolition and perhaps more incentive to deconstruct. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions around the table? No? Okay. Okay, so I guess then we don't have anybody from the public, it doesn't look like, who would like to speak to this item. Okay, then I would look to this table I guess let's move receipt first. Moved and seconded, and all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Okay. And what is the will around the table? Councillor Green? Oh, sorry.
I'm just seeking your advice on procedure. I have a motion arising from our discussion. Is that agreeable?
I think, I'm going to go to Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to maybe get some clarification because it could impact the decisions council makes going forward in the bylaw. If that was around a referral to the Heritage Commission for the fees, through you to Councillor Green. So, thank you. And so in that regard, then my advice would be that, so typically council gives 3 readings to bylaws because you're required to have a clear calendar day between the date of 3rd reading and adoption. In this case, and then technically speaking, and it's articulated in your council procedure bylaw as well, that a change to a bylaw can be made before 3rd reading. So if council wish to refer this matter to the commission for their consideration, staff might recommend that council give it 2 readings, have that done in case there's any recommendations that come back to council. Then you wouldn't have to rescind 3rd reading. The alternative is having it read 3 times, and if changes came back, council could rescind 3rd reading, make the changes, give it 3rd reading, and it's going to go to 2 meetings anyway. So it's sort of, the question comes whether or not there would be any changes, and there's the 2 options there for council.
So if I understand, then we would, if we did 1st and 2nd reading on the bylaw as it stands right now, it would go off, but we also make a motion to send it off to Heritage for them to review the Heritage aspect. Then that would come back at some point after Heritage has met. So sometime in probably September or October. Would that be a correct timeline on that?
Through you, Chair, that's my understanding, is that the next meeting of the commission is September 4th, and which is a busy meeting, and followed by October 5th. So it comes down to the question of these fees wouldn't be implemented until council adopts the bylaw. And in any case, the earliest that would occur now is at September 4th. But if there's a referral to the commission, again, council could give it 3 readings now. And if the commission didn't suggest any changes, council can go ahead and adopt the bylaw at the next meeting. If they did, you can rescind 3rd reading, make the changes, read it the 3rd time, and send it to the next meeting for adoption. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Green, if you don't mind, I'll go to Councillor Appleton because he had a question, I think. So I'll go to Councillor Appleton. And I thought the mayor had his hand up, but it looks like he took it down. Okay, so Councillor Appleton does not have his hand up anymore. but Mr. Bull does.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, sorry, I wanted to follow up on Mr. Coates. He's correct. So it would take a lot of time, or it would take time, sorry. Shouldn't put a value to that. However, that is problematic for the fees and charges bylaw because we also have passed the sidewalk patio program bylaw the other week. And some of the fees for that bylaw are in this particular proposed new bylaw. So, another suggestion would be to either leave the heritage-related fees unchanged at this point and seek a separate input from the Commission if Council desires, or to leave them as they are now and maybe update them later. What we didn't highlight to you today is that these fees are, well, I think Mr. Green made reference to cost recovery, but specifically for heritage alteration permits and some other permits, that is deliberately placed at a much lower cost recovery rate than the others. So there's some recognition given to wanting to support heritage alteration permits. That said, if council would like to refer it, maybe there's a way to still get the bylaw in place with either the existing fees or the proposed new ones, and do the referral process separately if that's council's if council is okay with that. Thank you.
Okay, so I think what I heard was we could remove the heritage aspects of the bylaw out if we so choose, but keep the other aspects in so that it can move forward, especially around the patios and, yeah. So we can, okay, I think I understood that, but I'm going to go to Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to staff, I just had a question around whether or not we are able to increase demolition fees, because I agree with the comments around incentivizing deconstruction, but I have heard in the past that we can't charge more for permit fees than than the time is to process. And so I'm wondering what capacity we have to increase the demolition fee versus would we need to reduce the deconstruction fee as a simple approach as opposed to going to a policy level.
Director Bull.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, unfortunately, that's a very specific topic where we're considering, or there's an interest to maybe incentivize deconstruction over demolitions. But that I do think, though, that's outside of the scope what we're trying to do here. We're updating one bylaw, we're updating fees from a number of other sources as well, and consolidating them into one. I think that would be require some separate follow-up to really do it justice, I think. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Murdoch.
Sorry, thank you for that. I was going to agree that I think that it's probably appropriate for us to pass the first, second reading, amend the bylaw to leave heritage alone at current rates for now, and then refer those items to heritage for comment. This proposed changes to comment. But one question I had on it was like the heritage alteration permit. Those types of fees, are they on top of any sort of like building permit or other fees? Like if people are doing any normal building, they would have a building permit attached, correct? So is this a special fee in addition to what they would pay as a normal sort of building permit fee, or is this in replacement of those types of fees?
And I'll go to staff for that.
Yeah, through the chair, the proposed building permit fees in this bylaw replace the current ones in the building bylaw. So the entire package would be replaced and moved from the building bylaw to the fees and charges bylaw.
I think what the mayor is asking is with the heritage fee in there, is that over and above the amount that they're paying for their building permit? That's correct, is it not, Mayor?
Yes.
That's correct, yes.
Sorry, and the answer is yes, that's in addition to, yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you. And then so that supports my thoughts on this, that heritage changes are often more expensive than normal building changes, and the building permits are attached to the value of those changes. So I think there's already a bit of a cost acceleration for heritage. I think that those considerations should be looked at before we make a final decision. So I think procedurally though, we should move the balance of this forward and just refer just the heritage portions, the heritage, just to make it clear also what we're asking of them.
So is that a motion, Mayor?
Yeah, I guess procedurally here, what I think the best practice would probably be to, and correct me if I'm wrong, move first and second reading and then move an amendment to leave the heritage, or to change the heritage fees to keep them, and then a motion to refer the matter of heritage fees to the Heritage Commission. Is that procedurally the best way of going about this, Mr. Coates?
Mr. Coates?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would agree that that would be the appropriate process. And then we just want to seek clarification from council in terms of the amendment when that time comes up, just to make sure that we have the dollar amounts correct to plug into the bylaw that you're going to consider third reading of.
Okay, so Mayor, do you want to make those motions?
Sure. So I would move that the planning, building, and development fees and charges bylaw number 4835/2023 be read a first and second time.
And do I have a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion?
Before we call the question, I would then move an amendment. I think this is appropriate at this point, Mr. Coates.
No, I think we call the question on the first and second reading, Mayor, and then we make an amendment motion.
Okay.
So I'll call the question on first and second reading. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Okay, Mayor.
Then I would move to amend the what is this called? The fees and charges. I guess it's just the fees and charges Schedule 1 to leave the all heritage related fees in as their existing levels.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Green. Any discussion? Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, just a question for the motivator. I guess I'm not clear on whether that amendment is basically to not increase fees, or as per the current discussion of sending it to the commission with the sort of enhanced knowledge that we are looking for some cost recovery, and asking how they see that playing out.
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
My comment on that is this is a procedural piece to just change the numbers, and the next motion would be to refer this to the Heritage Commission for their input on those things. And I think that context is very important with that document broken. But at this point, it's just a motion to, and this just procedurally to get rid of that so that I can move forward the third reading with those changes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. All in favor? I'm going to call the question. All in favor on the amendment? Any opposed? None opposed?
Did I do third reading at this point, Mr. Coates, or should I make the referral motion?
Yep, third reading and then the referral motion. Yes, that would be correct. So
I'll move the third reading as amended.
Okay, and seconded. No discussion on third reading. So all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Third reading has passed. And Mayor, a referral motion.
Yeah, I just refer the matter of heritage-related fees under Schedule 1 of this bylaw to the Heritage Commission for comment. And I think the Councillor Smarts, that's the motion. If there's a seconder.
Yeah. Do we have a seconder? Yeah, seconded by Councillor Paterson.
I think Councillor Smart's point. I think if staff could just, as they bring this forward to that commission, that they also take the time to explain that we do have to have cost recovery, where this sits in the proportionality of that, so they have some of that context attached to the conversation as we're considering those.
Thank you, Mayor. And Councillor Watson, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I just need a little clarification. I thought we had just changed the fees in the bylaw to what they used to be for heritage items. And so if that's the case, how will the Heritage Commission have anything to comment on? I guess I'm a little getting confused about the process. Yes. If somebody could set me straight, that would be helpful.
Mayor, do you have any comment on that?
I'll seek advice from Mr. Coates on wording, but
Mr.
it would
Coates,
be
yeah.
referring the originally proposed heritage fee changes to the Heritage Commission for comment.
Yeah, okay. I think Mr. Coates is nodding in agreement with that.
Through the chair, yes, and if I had one more set of hands, I'd be able to get that typed up on the screen for you, but it is that the proposed fees pertaining to heritage matters be referred to the Heritage Commission for comments.
Okay, so proposed fees, Councillor Watson, is that good?
Thank you. That
Yeah,
makes it much clearer to
perfect.
me about what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I will call Councillor Smart.
Thank you, through you, Acting Mayor. I just want to make sure, because I don't know if we've sort of fully had the conversation at the table. I just want to make sure that we're all, I guess, on the same page with wanting some cost recovery with the very careful understanding that we do not want to de-incentivize heritage, and very importantly with some of those fees to have people not submit applications because of the fees. But I just wanted to, if there is appetite from some people of having the fees stay the same, I just think it would be important for us to have that informed knowledge sent to the commission.
Okay, I think that is understood through staff, so I think we're good there. The motion, I'm going to call the question on the motion. And all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you very much. Okay, I think that is all we need for that item. Yes, you guys have had your department's had a very long night there, so thank you very much. We're going to go now on to item number 4.5, which is a motion to reconsider Council Resolution 2023-340 from July 10th. And Councillor Paterson, I believe it was you who would like this motion to come forward for reconsideration, so I will give you the floor. And just to let everybody know that it would be the original motion, the original resolution that is being rescinded. Councillor Paterson.
Thank you, Chair. And just to comment on this, and I appreciate Council bearing with me on it. It's not always easy to bring forward a reconsideration of a motion, but having listened to the presentation by the merchants and rereading staff's report, in retrospect, I decided that their recommendations to remove the bollards, in fact, was wisely thought out. I think that the bollards are not really a remedy for the problems that we face. The problems are really the width and condition of the village sidewalks. Oak Bay is lauded as a compact and walkable community. Sidewalks are a fundamental component of an active transportation plan and connector to public transportation, especially on Oak Bay Avenue. So in consideration of the barrier to to actually maintenance and care of the streets, the service level of the streets, the indication by the merchants of the problems that it was causing to them, and the recognition that in fact the real problem is not the bollards. The real problem is the sidewalks and the accessibility of the street in itself. I would like to have it reconsidered, and I will be I believe after the reconsideration, changing my
So I think we
decision.
have to have the reconsideration motion on the table, so you need to make that motion, Councillor Paterson.
Okay, so that the resolution is that the temporary sidewalk and widening devices installed in 2020 by direction from the Emergency Operations Center as a pandemic response and reaffirmed for use by Council in 2021 be removed throughout the district, with the exception of Crescent Road and the shortened crosswalks at Oak Bay Avenue and Wilmot and Cadborough Bay Road.
And do I have a seconder? Seconded? Okay, so now it can be up for discussion. I just want to clarify that with that motion being put on the floor, because at our last meeting we did make an additional motion in regards to Crescent Road, the additional motion that we made in regards to Crescent Road stands in place, if I'm correct, Mr. Coates, and Mr. Coates will weigh in on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're correct, but I just want to point out too that procedurally, this motion to reconsider Resolution 2023-240 or 340, sorry, has been put on the floor, but Council needs to decide whether or not that reconsideration is going to happen. It's been moved and seconded. It needs to be voted on. If that's approved, then it's back on the floor live.
Thank you for that clarification. So the motion is on the floor. So we will call a question on the motion to see if we will do it for reconsideration. All in favor? Do I have anybody online? I can't see what's happening online. Mayor Murdoch, you're in favor? Okay. That's Paterson, Braithwaite, Green, and Murdoch in favor. And those opposed? Appleton, Smart, and Watson opposed. Okay, so it is now on the table for reconsideration. And I think you were motivated already, Councillor Paterson. I do see that there's a member of the public that would like to speak to this, so I think I will go to the public first, and then I will come back to this table. So I see Tom and Jean, you have your hand raised. If you'd like to unmute yourself, welcome, and please just state your name and municipality of residence, please.
Yeah, this is Tom Newton, and I live in Oak Bay at 2125 Oak Bay Avenue. And I spoke to this motion when it was before council before. These extensions are really important to a number of people who live along and near Oak Bay Avenue who use mobility devices. I agree that there needs to be wider sidewalks on Oak Bay, and that's a long-term goal, but that is probably at the earliest 5 years in the future, and probably more. So having the extensions has been a real increase of quality of life for people living on the avenue in terms of being able to comfortably walk down from say Elgin Avenue to the grocery store, or from up the street at Foul Bay down. So it's a really important amenity that wasn't planned for, but it has happened. I saw some of the writing of the Bosley people about their problems, and I think Bosley is having it here is really important, but there seems to be possibilities for alleviating their problem in terms of having a pickup spot in their own parking lot. And they say they're losing business because people are going elsewhere to other Bosley stores, but the other Bosley stores are at London Drug downtown, which is a terrible place to try and park if you've been down there, or up at Shelburne Plaza, which also seldom would you get a place in front of Bosley's on Shelburne because Tim Hortons is right there next door. So I think I understand that there's a need for parking, but my observation is, and I walk this 2 or 3 times a day, so I consider myself an expert on parking on Oak Bay Avenue, is that there is almost always parking on Oak Bay Avenue if you walk a block, maybe within a block, and so I think it's being misconstrued that there is not enough parking on Oak Bay Avenue because of these extensions. What it does do is allow people with wheelchairs to comfortably come down the street where the narrow sidewalks do not. And as I said, the extension of the sidewalks, the increased width of the sidewalks, is not going to happen. There's no, the sidewalk report hasn't even been tabled before council. So we've got 4 or 5 years, and a lot of these people are in their 80s. They don't have 4 or 5 years to wait for you to build bigger sidewalks. So that's my input on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newton. Okay, back to this table, because I don't see anybody else that's looking to speak to this item. And I'm, Councillor Paterson, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I really appreciate those comments, and I understand completely where they're coming from. I see less evidence of the bollards on Oak Bay Avenue continuing to provide safety simply because since with increased traffic, there's been a real change in kind of who and how those pathways are being used. But I would look, if this is approved, I would look forward to also then making a further motion arising that would refer the pedestrian and sidewalk planning for Oak Bay Avenue to be referred to council priorities, the upcoming priorities session, so that we could expedite work on the Oak Bay Avenue portion of the pedestrian and sidewalk plan, and independent of the village plan that we've been waiting for. Because I think it's really been waiting for the village plan that has been holding this up. And I think we can all agree that we, certainly the survey response to the pedestrian survey, we had an overwhelming response. And the public comments where they wanted wider sidewalks and crosswalks, better maintenance, no obstructions, speed control, and reduce conflict and interactions between active transportation. So I really feel that we would have strong support for going forward with remediation of Oak Bay Avenue sidewalks independent of the village plan. Just to clarify that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. I do not support that direction as proposed by Councillor Paterson. And I think it's because I do agree with our speaker, Mr. Newton, that it is a long time before any changes that would come even from an accelerated planning process will be seen on the ground. And in the meantime, we have a system that actually, although far from perfect, does create more space for pedestrians and provides improved accessibility. And I don't want to see that lost. And that was the discussion we had at the last meeting when we talked about this, that although it wasn't perfect, it was definitely better than going back to what we had before the bollards were installed. And I also think that we also talked at the meeting about not separating the sidewalk and pedestrian realm planning from the village planning, because they are connected. They are very integral components, one of the other. So I don't want to see more work going to staff as a result of any changes to what we already decided on. We were going to stay the course, keep to our priorities, and keep to the timelines we'd all agreed to. So I will not be supporting a motion to change the direction that we had already taken. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. And I know we had quite the conversation about this last time it was here. So, and assuming from the vote that took place before that, the 3 people who were voted against it before are probably still going to vote against it. But I will go to Councillor Smart, and let's just be cognizant of our time, please.
Thank you, and I will be brief, but I just want to comment that tonight in between meetings I went outside and saw the bollard pathway being actively used by seniors and walkers while there was not a car parked on the road. And I really just feel strongly that we can't take this added accessibility that allows people to navigate the public space away from them in preference for cars when we have so many other great tools in which to solve the very important problems that the business community brought up. We could be providing spaces on the avenue that are not just designated accessible, but just like they have in the malls, we can have spaces that are for people that have wheelchairs and strollers and walkers that will be able to park closer to their spaces. We can have designated pickup spots. There are other solutions.
Thanks, Councillor Smart. Okay, I'm going to, did you want to talk? No. I'm going to call, yes? Yeah, okay, so Councillor Paterson, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking in opposition to the motion on the floor, in addition to the comments that I made about the specifics of this last time, I want to raise my deep concerns about this being back in front of council at this juncture at a special council meeting that is not part of our regular schedule. There was extensive public input to this topic when it was brought before council the first time. Dozens of letters in support, significant public support. This is an off-schedule council meeting. It was added to our regular schedule, and we're doing the reconsideration at this point. Does not afford the public who supported the retention of the bollards at the original council meeting to input to this meeting. They are not going to be expecting that this should be coming back up for reconsideration, and that decision should be voided at this stage of the game. So I will express my concerns about that. This is a backward step. There's no other way to characterize this other than to say it is a backward step in safety for pedestrians and folks who are getting around in public space without a car. There is no other way to characterize it than that. We're actually going backwards in terms of safety by making that decision. And so I'm very disappointed in that direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Appleton. I understand your concerns. I think this was the only meeting that this could have come back to within the 30-day limit. So that's why it's back at this meeting. So, yeah, go ahead.
Further to that point, can I ask a question of Mr. Coates, through you to Mr. Coates? Does the procedures bylaw provide that the 30 days of notice means that the motion has to be issued, the motion has to be received within that 30-day period of time, or does it have to be completely dealt with by council, or could it potentially be referred forward?
Just making sure my microphone hasn't gone to sleep, through the chair. So the standing of the motion now is it's live before council. So the 30-day clock has been met in terms of the council's ability to reconsider. So what council does with this motion now is completely within council's discretion. The reconsideration issue is attended to. The timelines are completely council's going forward. So there's no stipulations on the disposition of this. It can be dealt with in any way any motion of council can otherwise be dealt with.
Thanks, Mr. Coates. Okay, I am going to, Mayor Murdoch, you have your hand up. I'm
Yeah,
trying
thank
to
you,
get
through
asked
Chair.
to the question, so yes, thank you.
Is Councillor Appleton complete? Done?
I
His
think
comments?
so, yep.
Thank you, Chair. I just very quickly, there's two things. One, I really was struck by speaking in support of the motion. I think the business owners and operators on the avenue, I think they made a very compelling case that we need to do what we can to support the vibrancy and the activity in the village to support them. They're still struggling post-COVID. I thought they made a very compelling case for that. And, I think if anybody who's there all the time seeing what's going on has a viewpoint, they've got a vested interest in making the village a success. So do take that advice that came forward to heart. And I would also just suggest that as a mild counter to Councillor Appleton's comment, I actually, I don't agree that this is making it less safe. Safe pedestrians need, kind of like safe cycling infrastructure ideally has barriers. Putting pedestrians at street level with only a plastic bollard as protection does not necessarily make them safer. What we're talking about is reverting to a sidewalk system that is inconvenient, absolutely, because it's too narrow, so people have to pull over and let people pass. It's not attractive, it's not ideal, and definitely needs to be changed, but I don't agree, actually, in my personal assessment of it, that it's actually less safe. I think that is, from my observation, not the case. But it's certainly less convenient for people in those narrow stretches. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Okay, I'm going to call a question on this. So all in favor of the resolution that's on the table? Councillor or Mayor Murdoch, Councillor Green, Paterson, and Braithwaite in favor, and those opposed? Appleton, Watson, and Smart opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And we don't have to do anything else on that, correct, Mr. Coates? Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we go to number 4.6, which is the letter from Black Press Media, Bill C-18, Online News Act. And I don't know is anybody speaking to this, Mr. Coates, or is it just for information and we can make a decision on what we might like to do?
That's correct, Chair. So, and if you like, I can certainly happy to answer any questions with communications in my area of responsibility. So happy to do that.
Thank you. I guess one of the main questions would be, what amount of money do we actually spend on Meta advertising?
Thank you, Chair. So The average spend on that is sort of $500 to $700 a year. So it's a very small amount of the advertising that we do, because in comparison, we might on an annual basis spend $12,000 a year advertising in the Oak Bay News, because I think that's where the public is generally looking for that. And when we're talking about statutory advertising, it's important for us to keep that in a predictable location, and so the operational impacts on the district to not use meta platforms is not consequential.
Okay, so so perhaps I'll look to this table. I mean, Councillor Green.
I'll move that we support Black Press through, I'm sorry, was it a letter that they wanted of?
Through the chair, I think what my understanding of the ask is to cease the usage of the meta platforms for advertising. And if council wished to consider a motion like that, I could have one for you in about 2 clicks of a mouse here.
Thank you. I'd appreciate the help. Thanks.
Okay, so if we'll give Mr. Coates, I'm trying to make you a councillor, Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates, a moment to get that up on the screen. That staff be directed to terminate the practice of advertising with meta platforms that do not enable access to Canadian news. Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Appleton. Any discussion around this, around the table? No? Okay, looks like it's pretty supportive. Oh, sorry, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I do actually want to discuss this a little bit, and I want to support this, but I also question how much impact we will have versus how much we will lose potentially in, I guess I would like to hear more potentially from staff of the impact of this.
I guess we'll go to Mr. Coates on that one.
Absolutely, and I'm just going to recall a note from staff who in the communications on this. So if they just indulge me for a moment to call that up, I've got some more meat to put on.
Okay, and while you're looking for that, I guess that what I would say is I would be in support of this motion. I think that what Black Press does for us within the community is huge. I think that as a community newspaper, we should be supporting them. I hear what Councillor Smart is saying, that we don't want to lose any aspect of the online, but I think what I'm hearing from Mr. Coates is that the spend that we have on that is very minimal. It doesn't mean we can't do other things online, I suppose, but it would be just not putting our dollars towards the online.
Thank you. So the platforms that we use are Instagram and Facebook. Those are the ones that are affected by, those are the ones that aren't participating in C18 currently. And there is, Google's another platform, but they haven't come out and indicated that they're not going to provide access to Canadian news, because it's, but I think there's a thinking that they may, but, and so, and there may be others, but our usage of these platforms is minimal, Instagram and Facebook. And so there's other ways, other social media tools that staff, I think, use more frequently that don't come with a cost to push out information as well. Okay. I think Twitter is a typical one, and whether or not Twitter joins into this, I mean, I don't think any of us know, and that's the issue. And so,
thank you. Yeah, thanks. Okay, Councillor Smart.
And again, I'm a little bit torn on this just because I don't understand entirely how much we're going to be losing and whether we're going to be losing a particular engagement sector with youth, for instance, through Instagram. And so what I guess what I want to have a little more detail on is when we talk about advertising, like, are we saying that we will not be able to use Instagram at all to communicate like entirely, or just that we can't advertise on Instagram? And so I just need some more clarity on what we're losing and what we're still able to do.
And Mr. Mr. Coates, if you're going to answer really quickly, because otherwise I'm going to have a motion to extend the meeting by 10 minutes, I would say. Probably would be enough for this discussion. So can I have a motion to extend the meeting by 10 minutes? Moved, and anybody seconded? All in favor? And online, you're in favor? Yes. 10 minutes? Okay.
No, sorry, I'm opposed.
Okay, so that means that either you're going to choose to leave the meeting, Councillor Watson, or we're going to have to stop the meeting. So that's up to you. If you would like to leave the meeting before in the next 30 seconds, then we'll put you as having left the meeting. Otherwise, we will stop the meeting in 30 seconds.
It's all right. I'll leave the meeting. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Okay, so all in favor of extension 10 minutes? Okay, and non-opposed? Perfect, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a good answer for that question. And I don't understand the distinction between what we would pay for and what we would use typically. Again, I think I'd have to come back to council with some details on that, and I don't think I have at this time of night staff available to pick their brain on the implications of that. And I really wouldn't want to suggest that it might be one way or the other, because I'm really just not clear on what that would be.
Councillor Smart, you had another question?
Yeah, I guess my other question would just be around for how long. We don't know how this is going to play out. So I guess I still have questions. And as I say, like in principle, I want to support this, but I just worry about like all the different types of public engagement that we do, and even things that we might be, rolling out, particularly with everything that's going on with our housing and stuff. And are we going to lose a large sector of how we communicate with especially young people in our community?
Thank you. I'll go to the mayor next, and then to Councillor Green.
Thanks to you, Chair. I appreciate the wording of this. I want to separate this from Black Press. This is not they're raising the issue for us, but it is, a substantial issue in Canada. And so I'm supportive of the motion. And I think the Councillor Smart's point is really a good one. I think we will lose something here in that obviously we increase our reach by advertising. You get people who follow you, see you on Instagram, but if you advertise, you get a wider audience. So we will lose some of that, and it's theoretically in the short term, because this is a pressure mechanism to encourage these online platforms to follow Canadian law and enable the ability for links to news organizations to make money from those links. Without it, our news, this is totally symbolic at this point, $700, no one's going to notice, but it'll mean our name is added to a list of currently the province of British Columbia and a number of other communities in the province that are signing up to say, no, this is an important piece of a really important piece for Canadian media to be able to have long-term viability in a modern world. I think it's just, to my mind, this is a positive symbolic measure that we're just taking a small step, not to spend our $500 to $700 a year. Granted, nothing much, but I think symbolically it's quite large. So I just encourage people to support it, and obviously as it comes back in September, hopefully it's to be resolved. And I like the wording of this because it does mean that if it is resolved, we don't have to make any changes. It just disappears automatically.
Thanks, Mayor. That was a really good point, and I appreciate that because that helps sway me as well. Councillor Green.
Yes, I think, and I agree with the mayor as well, and I agree with others, and I appreciate Councillor Smart's comments. But I would say that if we were selling products and services or real estate, yes, it would have a huge impact. But we're not in that business. We're in the business of communicating and local government. I also know that LinkedIn is used a lot by local government staff and politicians. So it's a it's a good platform as well. So I will support the motion, obviously, because I made it too. So thank you.
Okay, I don't see any public input on this. I don't see any. So I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you very much. I think we're only looking now for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mayor, for phoning in, and thank you to Councillor Watson as well for almost making it to the end.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great August.
Have a great rest of your holiday.
Thanks.